the embroidered silks and woven rugs like restless spirits. Her eyes, red and swollen with unending tears, reflected the dim golden light as fresh drops fell silently onto the cold stone floor. She moved slowly, each step heavy with the burden of unspoken sorrows, and approached the small cradle where her child slept. Innocent and unaware of the storms tearing through the realm and through her own heart, she knelt beside the cradle, one trembling hand gently brushing the soft cheek of her sleeping babe, and the memories crashed over her like waves upon a besieged shore. The voice of Malhon echoed again and again in the chambers of her mind, each word a dagger wrapped in wisdom and warning. What do you not see, my daughter? How deeply envy has entangled you in its fiery web? I understand this is a most difficult trial placed upon your soul by the Almighty. Your heart burns like the forges of war that rage beyond these walls. Yet you must accept it now. Aspurcha is the wife of Sultan Orhan. Nelofar had answered then with a voice broken by pain. My mind grasps the truth, mother, yet my heart blazes in uncontrollable flames. After Orhan, must I also share my children with this woman? And Malhun, with the steady gaze of one who had seen empires rise and fall, had replied, Allah the most merciful commands that the protection of every child rests first with its mother and father. But above all, the true guardians of our children are the realm and its survival. You, Nilofar, are a vital pillar of this state, just as Asporcha has become. Therefore, never cast the shadow of resentment or jealousy upon her in the pure hearts of your children. Do not allow your nafs, your lower self, to overpower your reason and faith. Do not damage the trust and confidence I have placed in you, or you alone shall carry the heavy cost of that wound. Now, in the suffocating silence of her chamber, Nilofa rocked back and forth, sobs racking her body as fresh tears streamed down her face, the weight of duty pressed upon her chest like an iron breastplate. The flames of jealousy licked at her soul, yet deeper still burned the fear of failing her children, her sultan, and the sacred trust of the realm. Outside, the night wind howled through the palace corridors, carrying faint, distant echoes of clashing steel and the cries of men locked in mortal combat, reminding her that while she wrestled with the battles of the heart, true war devoured souls on the blood-soaked fields beyond. Far from the marble halls of Bursa, deep in the forested lands of Chana, the night had become a living inferno of steel, fire, and death. Smoke hung thick in the air, choking the lungs and stinging the eyes, while the ground turned to mud under the trampling boots and spilling blood of countless warriors. Iverinos and Zarkutai fought like lions unleashed from the gates of paradise, their blades flashing mercilessly as they cut through Shahanshah's forces alongside the steadfast warriors of Damir Khan. The clash of swords rang out like thunder, arrows whistled through the darkness like vengeful jinn, and men fell screaming into the eternal night. Zarkutai's voice boomed across the battlefield, powerful and unyielding as he raised his bloodied sword high. Shahanshah, you cursed spawn of darkness, come forth and face me if you dare challenge the justice of Allah. His axe swung in wide, devastating arcs, felling enemies who dared stand before the wrath of true believers. Not far away, Shahanshah himself battled desperately, his once proud form now weary and stained with sweat and blood. Mahmud fought at his side until he seized the ruler's shoulder amid the chaos and shouted urgently, Shahanshah Sahab, we are losing this fight, the tide has turned against us. Warriors of the realm, withdraw, fall back into the shadows, Shahanshah commanded, his voice cracking with bitter desperation and the sting of impending defeat. His surviving forces began a chaotic retreat, stumbling through the undergrowth and narrow forest paths as the night swallowed them whole. In another fierce duel nearby, Tamir Khan's elite guard Umar clashed blades directly with Sultan Orhan Sahib. Their swords sang a deadly song under the pale moonlight filtering through the trees. Orhan moved with the experience and divine favor of a true commander, parrying, striking, and pressing forward with unshakable resolve. With a powerful, decisive thrust, he drove his blade deep into Umar's torso. Tamir Khan witnessed the fatal strike from a short distance, his face twisting in raw grief and uncontrollable rage. Orhan gripped the dying warrior firmly, his voice low and grave like the judgment of fate itself. I have severed your tail this night. Now the turn of your head draws near. He released Umar, who collapsed face down into the blood-soaked earth, life departing with a final rattling breath. Seeing this, Damir Khan charged toward Orhan in blind fury, only to be struck down by a precisely loosed arrow that found its mark. His loyal men rushed forward, dragging their wounded lord away toward temporary safety, their boots pounding the ground in desperate retreat. Sultan Orhan, eyes blazing with purpose, called out across the fray, Zarkotai Sahab! Pursue them without mercy. Zatkurtai and his fierce riders thundered after the fleeing enemy like wolves on the hunt. Shahanshah, the injured Damir Khan, and Mahmud fled ahead with their battered troops, weaving desperately through narrow gullies and dense groves. Zarkai's forces closed the distance relentlessly, blades ready, yet as they pressed deeper into the shadowed defile, Yakid, his face concealed behind dark cloth like a traitor's mask, stood waiting in ambush with ranks of hidden archers. A deadly storm of arrows suddenly rained down upon the pursuers from both sides of the narrow pass. Raise shields, form the wall. Zakutai roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. His men lifted their defenses in time, arrows thudding heavily into wood and iron. Still, Yakid and his concealed warriors poured volley after unrelenting volley, forcing the advance to stagger and halt. Zarpe caught fleeting glimpses of the veiled traitor losing death from the shadows, his form slithering like a serpent through the night. Cursing the cowardice of betrayal, Zarkotai ordered a tactical withdrawal. They pulled back and circled toward the alley from which the enemy had vanished, only to find it empty, nothing but trampled earth and the lingering scent of treachery. Rage burned hot in Zarkotai's chest. You flee now like poisonous snakes slithering into the dark. What will you do when the morrow comes? This matter shall not end here. There will be full reckoning for your sins. Turning to his captains, he thundered after them. Do not let the traitors escape the hand of justice. By the time Zarkotai returned to the main battlefield, Sultan Orhan and his loyal fighters had already annihilated the last pockets of Shahanshah's remaining soldiers. The ground lay carpeted with the fallen, the air heavy with the copper smell of blood and the smoke of dying fires. Orhan wiped his blade clean on an enemy banner and sheathed it with deliberate calm. Come, my brothers, we must join Zarqai Sahab and press the advantage. Just then Zarqai arrived, his armor dented and face streaked with dust and blood. They have slipped away into the night, my sultan. How did this happen? Uran demanded, his voice steady yet commanding. Hidden archers unleashed arrows upon us like divine judgment from the heavens. A veiled dog led the ambush, striking from shadows. Orhan's expression hardened with cold certainty. His face remains hidden for now, but his deeds have revealed his black heart. His end shall be nothing except death. By the will of Allah, justice will claim him. He turned to the steadfast Iverinos with genuine respect, softening his battle-hardened features. You arrived at the perfect moment, brother. You and all warriors like you, may Allah preserve you in safety and grant you victory upon victory. Iverinos bowed his head deeply. May the faith and the realm endure forever, my sultan. The warriors surrounding them echoed as one. Ameen, Ameen ya Rab. Orhan's gaze then turned solemnly toward the fallen. The hour has come to fulfill our final sacred duty to Buran Sahab, companion of the great Osman. His eyes rested upon the body of the revered warrior, carried with the utmost reverence through the carnage by loyal hands. Meanwhile, within the fortified walls of a distant stronghold, a lone messenger sprinted torchlit corridors and burst before Andreas, pressing a sealed letter into his waiting hands. Andreas broke the wax with urgent fingers, scanned the contents, and turned to his sister with grave resolve. My departure cannot be delayed, sister. I must go forth to receive Shahanshah. I shall meet your suitors at another appointed time. Without wasting another moment, he mounted his swift horse and galloped away into the enveloping darkness. Dispin, leading Abdul Rahman and Turhan, arrived at the meeting place only to discover Andreas had already departed. The princess addressed them with graceful poise. My brother greatly wished to meet you both and bestow fitting rewards for your service, but urgent and weighty matters have called him away this very night. Abdul Rahman replied with quiet dignity and honor. We have fulfilled our sworn responsibility, princess. Any man of true faith and oath would have done the same. Despin's face brightened with approval. As you requested, everything has been prepared according to your needs. I shall personally escort you to your designated quarters, the princess offered warmly, leading the way through the winding stone passages. Abdul Rahman and Turhan followed with lighter steps, their hearts eased by the knowledge of duty faithfully performed amid the greater storms raging across the land in a distant moonlit meadow. Far from the immediate clamor of battle, Alauddin Sahab rode at the head of his cavalry alongside Khalil and their loyal Sipahi. Their horses moved with steady purpose through the silvered grass. There they came upon Shamal seated alone beneath an ancient tree, head bowed in the deepest sorrow, tears carving paths down his weathered face. Alauddin dismounted and approached with measured, respectful steps. Assalamu alaikum, Shamal. Wa alaikum assalam, came the heavy reply. What grief has fallen upon you so heavily, brother? Speak, Alauddin inquired gently, seeing the man's shattered spirit. We have captured Chanali, yet in doing so we have lost Buran Sahab. Alauddin's face darkened like storm clouds. What words are these you utter? Shamal could only remain silent, overcome. Khalil's voice rose in solemn acceptance. Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi rajiun. Verily we belong to Allah, and very to Him we shall return. Tears now welled in Alauddin's own eyes as well. Buran Sahab, the light you brought to this world has been extinguished. You are now united with your beloved, faithful companion of my noble father. May Allah grant you the highest stations. He asked softly, Where is my brother? Shamal pointed the path, and Alauddin followed with a heart grown heavier still. On the honored field where the battle had raged, Zarkatai Sahab, Sultan Orhan, Tamir Boga, and Mustafa carried the body of Buran Sahab with solemn reverence toward the prepared grave. Alauddin Sahab and Khalil arrived with their warriors, swiftly dismounting to join the sacred duty. They stepped forward and lifted the fallen hero onto their strong shoulders alongside the others. Khalil added his strength without hesitation. Together, in unified steps, they bore him to his final resting place and lowered him gently into the earth that would embrace him until the day of judgment. Zarkotai wept openly, unashamed of the tears that flowed for his brother in arms, as sturdy wood was laid across the grave. Shovelfuls of dark soil followed, each one a prayer and a farewell. Thus was Buran Sahab, the ancient and loyal companion of Osman Sahab, committed to the mercy of Allah. Sultan Orhan spoke with deep reverence. Bring forth the horse of my respected and beloved companion. Buran's noble steed was led forward, its eyes seemingly mournful. Zarkpai approached and stroked its powerful neck with trembling hands. You are left without your master Buran this night. The saddle and reins were carefully removed. Zarkpai bound the horse's tail in the traditional sign of mourning. Alauddin observed and said quietly, His war has ended just as Buran's has ended. Is it not so, Zarkotai Sahab? Zarkotai nodded through flowing tears. Yes, my lord. Orhan stepped close and caressed the animal with affection and respect. You were the faithful companion of one of the realm's strongest and most honorable. You carried him through every storm and peril. When he stumbled, you became his shade and support. Go now, tread the free paths and open lands he could no longer reach. We shall follow when our own time comes. Zarkpratai gave the horse a final loving pat on its flank. You are free now, like my brother Buran. The magnificent steed bolted forward, galloping swiftly away and disappearing into the dark embrace of the forest. Overcome, Zarkpratai collapsed to his knees upon the earth, weeping for the brother he had lost. Sultan Orhan raised his voice to the assembled warriors. One arrow toward the Mashriq, from whence our noble blind first arose under the banner of faith. A skilled archer drew and loosed the arrow eastward into the night. One arrow toward the Maghrib, where he charged without tiring in the path of jihad and justice. The second arrow flew west, and the final arrow toward the heavens as a shining sign of his exalted station before Allah. The last shaft rose high into the starry sky. We are pleased with you, Burhan Sahab, Orhan declared solemnly. May Allah the most compassionate be pleased with you as well. Amin, the warriors responded as one, their voices carrying across the darkened field. Amin ya Rab Alamin. Aladdin raised his hands in supplication. O my Lord, forgive his sins, elevate his station, and grant him the company of the righteous in paradise. Deep within the shadowed ancient woods, Princess Aspurcha rode alone upon her swift horse, her cloak billowing like a ghost in the wind. She drew nearer to the secluded Kanka where her father, the Shahanshah, held the captive Nikos. Byzantine guards stood watch outside the stone structure, their torches flickering like weary eyes. Aspurcha paused at the tree line, her heart torn between the pull of blood and the greater call of honor, justice, and the fate that now bound her to Sultan Orhan's side. Long moments passed in silent, agonizing struggle as conflicting loyalties warred within her soul. Finally, with a heavy heart and tearful eyes, she turned her mount and rode back into the enveloping night, the weight of choices yet unborn pressing heavily upon her. Yet, even as these moments unfolded across the vast and troubled realm, the fires of war continued to smolder. Shadows lengthened and multiplied, alliances cracked like brittle blades under strain. Betrayals whispered their poisonous promises on the cold wind. Justice demanded its full measure, and fate turned its slow, inexorable wheel beneath the indifferent stars. The realm stood balanced precariously between glorious triumph and utter ruin. The battles yet to come would test the deepest reserves of faith, honor, courage, and steel in every soul who walked these bloodied paths. The night had grown deeper still, but the epic story of Sultan Orhan Sahib, his loyal right hand Turhan, the fierce Zakpotai, and all who stood for truth against betrayal was only beginning to unfold its full and mighty chapters. The velvet shroud of night has fully unfurled, and heavy shadows of clouds hover across the sky like an ancient calamity seeking a place to rest. The walls of Borsa Palace remain silent tonight, but within that silence dwells a scream sharp enough to pierce stone. Nilufar Hatun, her eyes a torrential sea of tears, crosses the threshold of her chamber, feeling a crushing weight upon her soul. She gazes at her sleeping, innocent child, her maternal heart agonizing as the words of Malhun Hatun echo in her ears like a twisting blade. Malhun had asked, "Do you not see how you are hollowing the very foundations of your state, consumed by the fires of envy? This is a trial, Nilufar, and in this trial your heart burns like a literal flame. But bravery lies in accepting reality. Aspurka is now the wife of Sultan Orhan. She is a limb of this sovereignty." Nilufar sobs deepen as she remembers asking her mother if she must share her children's rights with a foreign woman. The answer she received shook her to the core. The state protects the children even before the parents do. The state is the mother that shelters all. If you follow your ego, the only loss will be your own. Nilufar weeps, trapped in this whirlpool of thoughts, while the world outside trembles with the echoes of blood and steel. Far away, on the plains of Charnali, the dance of death continues. The clashing of swords and the neighing of wounded horses have turned the air macabre. Evrenos and Zarktai Sahib are reaping the soldiers of Shahanshah and Damir Khan as if they were dry stalks of wheat, like hungry lions lunging at prey. Zarktai's roar cuts through the din as he summons the ruler. "O spawn of the devil, come out and face me." Chaos reigns. Mahmud, standing near Shahanshah, shakes him, shouting that the tide has turned against them and they must retreat. The terror of defeat is naked in Shahanshah's eyes. He signals his remaining men to fall back. But the fire of war does not extinguish so easily. Burhan Faladio's personal rival, or perhaps the fierce commander Omar, who considered himself a titan of the blade, stands before Sultan Orhan. A duel ensues between them that seems to make time stand still. But Sultan Orhan's agility and valor have no equal. With a thunderous strike, the Sultan drives his blade through Umar's body. Tamir Khan watches this, his most trusted companion, crumbling into the dust before his eyes. Sultan Orhan catches the wounded Umar and whispers into his ear, I have cut your tail, next it will be your head. As he releases him, Umar's lifeless body strikes the ground face down. Driven mad by rage as Damir Khan rushes toward the Sultan, a hiss cuts through the air and an arrow buries itself deep into his flesh. His soldiers catch him as he falls and begin to flee. The Sultan commands Zartai, pursue them, do not leave them alive. Shahanshah, Damir Khan and Mahmud seek refuge in the dark alleys while Zartai's shadow looms behind them. They turn into a narrow street where the traitor Yaqid lies in ambush with his archers. As soon as Zartai arrives, a rain of arrows commences. The sound of iron striking shields is like hail falling from the heavens. Yaqid has hidden his face, but Zartai recognizes the treachery in his eyes. They escape under the cover of darkness, and when Zartai reaches the spot, there is nothing but dust and silence. Zartai clenches his fist in fury, vowing, You may hide in a hole like a venomous snake, but you shall pay for this with your neck. The battlefield is now strewn with corpses. Sultan Orhan gathers his men just as Zartai returns to report that they fled like cowards. The Sultan's face is flushed with righteous anger. When Zartai reveals that the masker also attacked Burhan, the Sultan declares, His face may be covered, but his soul stands naked. His end is nothing but death. The Sultan praises the bravery of Evrenos, and then a heavy melancholy settles over the air. Every eye turns toward where the lifeless body of Burhan Sahib lies. That brave soul, the loyal companion of Osman Bey, has reached the station of martyrdom. Elsewhere, inside the fortress, Andreas receives a message. He takes leave of his sister to go and receive the Shahanshah. Despina, who was bringing Abdul Rahman and Turhan to meet Andreas, finds him gone. She apologizes to the heroes, but Abdul Rahman's simplicity and character move her. He tells her, We have only fulfilled our duty, princess. There is no desire for reward. The princess leads them to their quarters, unaware that a mountain of grief has collapsed in the world outside. In the open plains, Aladdin Sahib advances with his soldiers when his gaze falls upon Shamil. Shamil, whose bravery was legendary, sits weeping like a broken man. When Aladdin asks and learns that Chanali was conquered but Burhan Sahib is lost to them, time itself seems to halt. The words Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi rajiun escape Khalil's lips, and tears stream from Aladdin's eyes. Remembering his father's loyal companion, he says, Your exile in this world has ended and you have united with your beloved. The scene is one that would make any soul tremble. Sultan Orhan, Zartai, Tamir Boga, and Mustafa carry Burhan Sahib's bier on their shoulders toward the grave. Aladdin and Khalil arrive and offer their shoulders for this final journey. As Burhan Sahib is lowered into the earth, Zartai's restraint shatters. He wails with a roar that shakes the heart. Soil is cast and a golden chapter of history sleeps beneath the ground. Sultan Orhan gestures and Burhan's loyal horse is brought forward. Zartai removes the saddle and binds the tail, the ritual of farewell for a warrior's steed. The Sultan speaks to the horse, You were the companion of a hero who never looked back. Go now, gallop in those valleys where Burhan could not fight. We shall follow you. With a pat from Zartai, the horse vanishes into the depths of the forest, as if chasing the spirit of its master. Sultan Orhan then draws 3 arrows. The first is shot toward the east, where the dawn of this brave lineage began. The second toward the west, where Burhan wielded his sword for the sake of truth. And the third toward the sky as a symbol of his high station. The entire atmosphere vibrates with the sound of Amin. But the story is not yet over. Deep in the forest, Princess Asporka arrives on horseback at the rich lodge where her father and Nikos are held captive. She sees the soldiers standing guard. Conflict rages in her heart. On one side is the bond of blood, and on the other, the path of justice. She chooses her way in the darkness and turns back. The night is deepening, and behind this silence, The roar of a massive storm can be heard. The swords have not yet returned to their scabbards, and the reckoning of blood is still to come. Assalamu alaikum Nazreen. The earth was still damp with the memory of burial. The soil over Burhan Sahib's grave had not yet settled, had not yet forgotten the weight of the body it had received, and the air around that sacred mound carried the scent of loss of something irreversible, something that no sword could undo and no treaty could restore. Sultan Alauddin Sahib stood near that grave, his hands clasped before him, his eyes lowered not in weakness but in the heaviness of a man who carries news that burns the tongue before it leaves the lips. And it was there in the shadow of death itself that he spoke the words that would set the hours ahead into motion. Halima, he said quietly, has gone after Dasoon. Sultan Orhan Sahib turned slowly. His face did not change, not yet, but something behind his eyes shifted the way a flame shifts when wind enters through a crack in the wall. He looked at Alauddin Sahib and waited because he knew, as every commander knows, that the first piece of news is never the last. There is always more. There is always a blade hidden behind the words. And Alauddin Sahib continued. Fatima, he said, and the Bazian, the sisters of the order, they too have been divided. The Jamaat has split into two factions. Some have stayed behind, loyal to the old ways, loyal to the command structure that has held them together through siege and storm. But others have followed their hearts instead of their orders, and now the formation is broken. The unity cracked like a clay vessel struck against stone. Sultan Orhan Sahib's voice was low when he asked the question, "Where is Fatima?" And Alauddin Sahib, may Allah grant him patience, answered without flinching, "She too has gone after Asporcha," he said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy, charged like the sky before a storm breaks. Sultan Orhan Sahib took a single step forward. And that step contained within it the weight of every decision he had ever made, every alliance he had forged, every enemy he had buried, every wife he had taken, every child he had held in his arms in the first moments of their life. He spoke and his voice was controlled, but beneath that control was a tremor that only those closest to him could detect. "Alauddin," he said, "what are you telling me? Where has Asporcha gone?" And Alauddin Sahib, standing there in the fading light beside the grave of a fallen warrior, told him everything. He told him that Shahanshah Enricos, the emperor, had been removed from his throne, that the palace in Constantinople had been seized, and the old emperor had been cast out, exiled, sent to a distant monastery, a Kanka far from the city, far from power, far from everything he had ever known. The throne had been taken by those who believed they had more right to it, and the old man who had once ruled an empire now sat in a cold stone room with nothing but his prayers and his memories. And Aspurka, Alauddin Sahib said when she heard this, she wanted to go to her father, she wanted to cross the water to reach him, to be at his side. But Halima Khatun, her mother by marriage, the woman who had taken her into this family and taught her the ways of this household, Halima had refused. She had said no. She had said it was too dangerous, that the roads were crawling with enemies, that the Byzantine factions would use her as a pawn, that her presence there would not save her father but would instead endanger everyone. And Halima was right, as she often was, but being right does not always stop the heart from breaking, and it does not stop a daughter from running toward the man who gave her life. Asporcha had fled. She had left the safety of the household, slipped away in the night, mounted a horse, and ridden out alone into the darkness, toward the monastery, toward her father, toward whatever fate awaited her on the other side of that decision. Sultan Orhan Sahib's jaw tightened. "Has Asporcha forgotten who she is?" he said, and the words were not a question but a wound spoken aloud. "Has she forgotten that she is no longer merely a princess of Byzantium? She is the wife of the Sultan. She is the mother of a child born under this banner. She carries the name of this house, and she has fled from it like a fugitive, like someone running from shame, when in truth she was running toward something far more dangerous than shame. She was running toward the past." Alauddin Sahib nodded. A single heavy nod, the kind of nod that says, "Yes, everything you fear is true, and more besides." And then Sultan Orhan Sahib turned to Khalil, who stood nearby, waiting, always ready, the kind of soldier who does not need to be told twice. "Khalil," he said, "prepare the horses. We ride tonight." But it was Ivranos who stepped forward then. Ivranos, the man who had once been an enemy, who had once stood on the other side of the battlefield with Byzantine steel in his hand and Byzantine orders in his ears. Ivranos, who had crossed over, who had seen the truth of what Orhan Sahib was building, who had laid down his old allegiance and picked up a new one, not because he was weak, but because he was wise enough to recognize where justice truly lived. Ivranos spoke, and his voice carried the calm authority of a man who knows the terrain, who has walked these roads before, who has studied the coastlines and the currents and the hidden paths that went through the hills and forests of Rumeli. I know this monastery, he said, I know where it is, and if we go by ship, by water, we will reach it faster than by land. The roads are watched. The forests are full of Damian scouts. But the sea belongs to no one and to everyone, and a fast vessel with a strong wind can cover in hours what horses would take days to cross. Sultan Orhan Sahib considered this. He looked at Evranos, and in that look was everything: trust, gratitude, the recognition that this man, this former enemy, had become something more than an ally. He had become a brother in purpose. Very well, the Sultan said. And then he turned to Aladdin Jandar and spoke with the voice of command, the voice that does not waver, the voice that men follow into fire and flood and the mouth of death itself. Take precautionary measures in Chanali, he said, against any possible attack from Karachi's forces. Fortify the positions, secure the passes, and then go to Bosa. The capital must not be left unguarded, not now, not when the enemies are circling like wolves around a wounded deer. And then he turned to Nasu. He said, you will dig trenches around the city, you will set traps, you will make the land itself a weapon so that any army that approaches will find not open ground but a labyrinth of death. Nasu Jelibi straightened his shoulders and placed his fist against his chest. As you command, my Sultan, he said, and in those words was the unshakable loyalty of a man who would sooner die than disobey. And then they moved, all of them. The orders had been given, and now the machine of war and rescue began to turn, each man going to his appointed task, each horse saddled, each blade checked, each prayer whispered under breath. The grave of Burhan Sahib stood alone in the fading light, a mound of earth marking the end of one story and the beginning of another, because in this world, in this time, every death was also a birth, every ending was also a beginning, and the wheel never stopped turning. But one man did not move. Jakatai Sahib remained beside the grave, his knees pressed into the earth, his hands open on his thighs, his head bowed. The grief that filled him was not the sharp, sudden grief of the battlefield, not the grief that comes when a man falls beside you and you must step over his body and keep fighting. This was the slow, deep grief that settles into the bones, that becomes part of the blood, that changes the way a man sees the world and everything in it. Burhan had been more than a comrade, he had been a brother, a mirror, a piece of Jakatai's own soul walking beside him through the years. And now that piece was gone, buried in the earth, and Jakatai could feel the hollow place where it had been, a wound that no physician could treat and no herb could heal. Shamal stood nearby, watching, waiting. He understood this grief because he had seen it before in other men, beside other graves, in other wars. He knew that there were no words that could fill that hollow place, but he also knew that silence, if left too long, could become a grave of its own. Come, Jakatai Sahib, he said gently. Come, my brother. The living must go on living. The dead have their own journey now, and we have ours. And slowly, painfully, like a man lifting a stone that is heavier than his own body, Jakatai rose to his feet. He did not look back at the grave. He could not. If he looked back, he would not be able to leave. And there was still work to be done, still enemies to face, still a world that demanded his presence and his strength. He walked away from that grave with Shamal beside him, and every step was a small act of courage, because grief, true grief, makes cowards of us all, and it takes a warrior's heart to keep moving when every fiber of your being tells you to lie down in the dirt beside the ones you have lost. And now the story moves, as stories must, to the forest. The deep forest where the trees stand like sentinels and the shadows between them hold secrets that the sunlight never touches. Here in this green darkness, Halima Khatun waited. She was not a woman who waited easily. She was a woman of action, of decision, A woman who had stood beside Ertugrul Ghazi himself, who had ridden through storms and sieges, who had held a blade in her hand when blades were needed and held a child in her arms when children were needed. But now she waited because waiting was the weapon that this moment required. A soldier came running through the trees, his breath ragged, his face streaked with sweat and dust. He reached Halima and bent double, gasping, and then straightened and delivered his report with the urgency of a man who knows that seconds matter. Halima Khatun, he said, they are coming, they are close. Halima's eyes narrowed. She looked at the handful of fighters around her, the Bazian, the sisters of war, and the few soldiers who had followed her into this desperate mission. They were not enough, she knew it. A commander always knows when the numbers are wrong, when the balance tips against you, when the odds shift from difficult to impossible. Our numbers are too few, she said, and her voice was steady, the voice of a woman who has faced worse odds and survived. We cannot attack them here. Not in the open. Not on their terms. I will find out from Dasun where they plan to spend the night. You must keep them talking, keep them occupied, distract them. Buy me time. Go. All of you. To your positions. And they went. The Bazian melted into the forest like water into sand, each woman finding her place among the trees and the rocks and the undergrowth, invisible, patient, deadly. Halima herself moved deeper into the shadows, becoming one with the forest, her breathing slow, her movements silent, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, and then they came. Demiran's soldiers, a column of armed men on horseback, moving through the forest with the confidence of men who believe they are safe, who believe that the trees around them hold nothing more dangerous than birds and deer. In the center of the column, bound in a wooden cage like an animal, was Dasun. His face was bruised, his clothes torn, his spirit battered but not broken, because Dasun was the kind of man whose spirit could bend but never snap, like a blade of Damascus steel that flexes under pressure but always returns to its true shape. And ahead of the column, blocking the road, was a pile of freshly cut wood, logs stacked across the path, too heavy to step over, too wide to ride around. A man and a woman stood beside the logs, axes in their hands, their faces the faces of simple woodcutters, ordinary people doing ordinary work in an ordinary forest on an ordinary day, except that nothing about this day was ordinary, and nothing about these people was what it seemed. The lead soldier reined in his horse and called out, his voice sharp with irritation. What is going on here? Is there no other place to cut wood except in the middle of the road? Move this. Clear the way. Hurry up. The man, the woodcutter, bowed his head in the submissive way of common people who have learned that submission is the price of survival. Sahib, he said, we are earning our livelihood. What can we do? It is just a woman and myself. We had no other place. The soldier turned to his men. Help them, he said. Move this wood to the side. We do not have time for this. And the soldiers dismounted, all of them. Every armed man in that column climbed down from his horse and moved forward to shift the logs because the order had been given, and soldiers obey orders, even small ones, even ones that seem insignificant, even ones that will, in a few moments, prove to be the difference between captivity and freedom. And in that moment, while every soldier's hands were full of wood and every soldier's back was turned, Halima moved. She was swift, silent, a shadow among shadows, a whisper of movement in the still forest air. She reached the cage where Dasun was held and pressed herself against the bars. Dasun, she whispered. His eyes widened. Halima Khatun, he breathed. Halima raised a finger to her lips. Be quiet, she said. We will save you, but our numbers are too few. We cannot fight them now. When they sleep tonight, when the fires burn low and the guards grow drowsy, that is when we will strike. Where will they stop? Where will they spend the night? Dasun's voice was barely audible. The first camp, he said, just ahead. They will stop at the first waypoint and make camp for the night. Good, Halima said. And then she was gone, vanished back into the forest as if she had never been there, as if the trees themselves had swallowed her. And Dasun was alone again in his cage, but no longer without hope, because hope had come to him in the form of a woman with iron in her spine and fire in her eyes. The soldiers finished moving the wood. They mounted their horses. The column moved forward, carrying Dasun deeper into the forest, closer to the camp where they would spend the night, where they would sleep, where they would believe themselves safe. And behind them in the forest, Halima emerged from the shadows and gathered her people around her. He says they will stop at the first camp ahead, she told them. We must take the shorter path. We must reach that place before they do. We must be in position, hidden, waiting, ready, come. There is no time to waste. Move quickly, move silently, move as if Allah Himself guides your feet. And they moved. Through the trees, through the undergrowth, through the darkness that was gathering in the spaces between the trunks, they moved like ghosts, like memories, like the wind that passes through the branches and leaves no trace. And now, in another part of the forest, another scene was unfolding, a scene of rage and pain and the bitter taste of defeat. Damirhan sat on a fallen log, his armor loosened, his face twisted with agony as he pressed a heated blade against his own wound, cauterizing the flesh, sealing the bleeding with fire and iron. The pain was immense, but Damirhan welcomed it because pain was easier to bear than humiliation, and humiliation was what Orhan Sahib had given him. Humiliation was what he wore like a brand on his skin. Shahanshah stood nearby, watching, his own face a mask of fury and frustration. The emperor without an empire, the ruler without a throne, the man who had once commanded legions and now commanded nothing but the tattered remnants of a failed alliance. And Damirhan, through gritted teeth, through the smoke rising from his own burning flesh, spoke the name that had become his obsession, his poison, his reason for breathing. Orhan, he snarled, Orhan, you took my precious heirloom, you took the treasured artifact of my ancestors. Orhan, you robbed me of hope, you cast me out of my homeland, you drove me from Chanali. Orhan, you expelled me from the land where my father's bones are buried, where my grandfather's blood was spilled, where my family built everything that we were. What will I tell my father? What words will I speak when I stand before his memory and confess that I lost everything? Orhan, I will end your bloodline. I will destroy your seed. I will wipe your name from the earth so completely that even the wind will not remember it. And Shahanshah, whose patience had been eroding like a riverbank in flood, turned on Damirhan with the fury of a man who has lost everything and has nothing left to fear. You fool, he said, you reckless, blind fool. Is our only problem that small piece of land you lost? Is that what concerns you now? A patch of earth? While empires crumble and thrones are stolen and the entire order of the world is being rewritten, you sit there weeping over a piece of ground. Damirhan rose to his feet and the movement was violent, sudden, like a bear rising on its hind legs. He moved toward Shahanshah and his hand was on his blade and his eyes were the eyes of a man who has been pushed beyond the limits of endurance. But Mahmud stepped between them, Mahmud with his broad shoulders and his steady hands and his voice that carried the authority of a man who has seen too many leaders destroy themselves through pride and anger. Damirhan stopped, but his voice did not. Keep your tongue in check, Shahanshah, he said, or you will face problems far worse than the ones you already have. Mahmud pushed them apart, his hands on both their chests, holding them at arm's length like a father separating squabbling children. Except these were not children but warlords, and the stakes were not toys but kingdoms. Commanders, Mahmud said, stop this fighting, stop it now. I am telling you both, if this continues, if we keep tearing at each other instead of at our enemies, we will all be destroyed, every one of us, we will be finished. Do you hear me? We will be finished. But Shahanshah was not done. First your brother's treachery, he spat at Damirhan. And now your incompetence, you left nothing behind you. Nothing, no fortress, no army, no tribe, nothing for us to fall back on. Nothing for us to use as a foundation. And Damirhan, his wound still smoking, his flesh still searing, fired back. The man who could not hold on to his own power now questions my strength. If you had taken Borsa when you had the chance, none of this would have happened. If you had struck when the iron was hot, if you had moved when I told you to move, we would be sitting on thrones right now instead of standing in a forest like hunted animals. Mahmud raised his voice, and when Mahmud raised his voice, men listened because Mahmud did not raise his voice often. And when he did, it meant that the situation had reached a point beyond reason. Enough, he roared. Enough. I am speaking to both of you. Stop devouring each other. Do not say I did not warn you. What is done is done. We will forget the past. We will forget what has happened. We will look at what is happening now. We will focus on the present and the future because the past is a dead horse and riding it will get us nowhere. The two men fell silent. Not because they agreed. not because their anger had cooled, but because Mahmud's words had the force of truth, and truth, even when it is unwelcome, has a weight that cannot be ignored. And then Mahmud spoke again, and this time his voice was calm, measured, the voice of a strategist laying out the pieces on the board. The new emperor of Rome, Doramsha, is waiting for us at the monastery. We will go there, we will consult, we will plan, we will find a way forward, because there is always a way forward, even when every road seems blocked and every gate seems locked. And Shahanshah, still seething, turned to Yakid, who stood in the shadows, watching, always watching, his face unreadable, his loyalties uncertain, his soul a battlefield where competing allegiances fought their own private war. Yakid, Shahanshah commanded, take Mahmud Sahib's soldiers, secure our route, make sure the road to the monastery is safe. Yakid bowed his head. As you command, Janab, he said, and the words came easily, too easily, the way words come from a man who has learned to say whatever is expected of him, who has learned that obedience is a mask that can be worn over any face, hiding any truth, concealing any betrayal. And Yakid departed. He rode out into the forest with soldiers at his back, and the trees swallowed him, and the darkness took him, and those who watched him go could not help but wonder what thoughts moved behind those still dark eyes. Damihan turned to Mahmud before leaving. And you, he said, his voice low and dangerous, do not come between us again. And then Damiran too was gone, riding away into the night. And Shahanshah was left standing in the clearing with only the trees and the stars and the bitter taste of his own impotence. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyil ajil azim, he whispered, and the words were both a prayer and a confession, an admission that his power had been taken, that his strength was not his own, that whatever happened next was in the hands of a force greater than any emperor or general or army. And now the story crosses the water, crosses the miles and the hours and the darkness, and finds Shaji Aspurcha at the gates of the monastery. She had ridden hard through the night alone, a princess without a guard, a wife without her husband's permission, a daughter driven by a love so fierce that it burned through every obstacle, every warning, every voice of reason that tried to hold her back. The monastery rose before her in the darkness, its walls grey and ancient, its windows narrow like suspicious eyes, its doors guarded by Byzantine soldiers who stood with spears and torches, their shadows long on the stone courtyard. Aspurcha studied them from the trees, she counted them, she memorized their positions, their patrol routes, the gaps in their attention, and then she acted. She removed the saddle from her horse. She whispered something in its ear, a word, a command, a secret language between rider and beast. And then she released it. The horse bolted forward, its hoofs striking sparks from the stone, its mane flying, its body a dark shape moving fast across the open ground in front of the monastery gates. The guard saw it. Who is there? One shouted. Over there. A horse? Go. Check it out. Run. And they ran, all of them. They chased the riderless horse into the darkness, because soldiers chase things that move. It is their nature. It is their training. And in that chase, they left the door unguarded. Aspocha rose from her hiding place. She moved quickly, her feet barely touching the ground, her body low, her breath controlled. She reached the door. She pushed it open. She slipped inside. The monastery was dimly lit, candles flickering in iron holders, their light throwing unsteady shadows on the stone walls. The air smelled of incense and old books, and the particular mustiness of a building that has stood for centuries, that has absorbed the prayers and the tears and the whispered confessions of generations. Aspocha moved through the corridors, her eyes adjusting to the darkness, her ears straining for any sound that might warn her of danger. She saw soldiers. Byzantine soldiers standing in alcoves, leaning against pillars, their weapons close at hand. She pressed herself into the shadows, waited until they looked away, and then moved past them, silent as smoke, invisible as a prayer, and then she heard voices. Women's voices, speaking in Greek, speaking with the quiet authority of women who live by rules and rituals, who have given their lives to God and expect the world to respect their sacrifice. Aspocha ducked behind a heavy wooden table, pressing her back against its carved surface, making herself small, making herself invisible. Two nuns walked past, their robes rustling, their sandals whispering on the stone floor. Be careful, one said to the other. No one is to go outside without permission. Remind everyone. Again, the first nun departed. The second continued forward, and as she approached the table where Aspocha was hiding, Aspocha stood up. The nun stopped, her eyes widened. Recognition flickered across her face like lightning across a night sky. Princess Aspocha, the nun breathed, and then she bowed. Thank God you are safe, she said. And then she asked the question that needed asking. How did you get inside? Aspocha did not waste time with explanations. I have come for my father, she said. I have come to take him away from here. Sister Sophia, will you help me? The nun Sophia looked at Aspocha with eyes that held both compassion and fear. Your father's imprisonment here is a great torment for all of us, she said. We have not forgotten the kindness he showed to our monastery when he was in power. The donations, the protections, the decrees that kept us safe when others would have torn our walls down. Princess, I will help you even if it costs me my life. But Aspocha pressed, sensing the hesitation, sensing the shadow behind the words. And Sophia told her, your father is being held in a room inside the inner courtyard, she said. The soldiers never leave that courtyard. They guard it day and night. Only I am allowed to enter to bring him food and water. And there is something else, something you must know. Princess, your father, the emperor, he is very ill. The words struck Aspocha like a physical blow. She swayed, and for a moment, just a moment, she was not a princess, not a warrior, not a wife or a fugitive. She was simply a daughter, and her father was sick, and she could not reach him, and the world was cruel, and the walls were thick, and the soldiers were many, and she was alone. What has happened to my father? She whispered, and the whisper held everything: fear, love, desperation, the terrible helplessness of someone who has crossed mountains and sees only to find that the final distance, the last few steps, may be the most impossible of. And now the story moves again, carried by the current, carried by the wind, carried by the relentless forward motion of time that waits for no sultan and no princess and no grieving soldier beside a fresh grave. On the water, on the dark water that separated the Muslim lands from the Byzantine territories, Sultan Orhan Sahib stood on the deck of a ship, looking up at the stars. The night was vast above him, infinite, scattered with points of light that had been burning since before the first man drew breath, since before the first prayer was spoken, since before the first blade was forged, and the first empire was built, and the first empire fell. And among those stars, one shone brighter than the rest, steady and unwavering, a fixed point in a turning sky. And Orhan Sahib remembered. He remembered a night, another night, a different night, when he had stood beside Aspocha and they had both looked up at the same sky, and she had pointed to that star and spoken its name. Do you know the name of that star? She had asked him, and her voice had been soft, curious, the voice of a woman discovering that the man beside her saw the same world through different eyes. Phosphorus, she had said. They also call it Venus. It represents the coming of the morning. It means a new beginning. And Orhan Sahib had smiled that he kept locked away behind his warrior's face, and he had said, we call it Zura, the evening star. It shows the way, and now standing on the deck of a ship in the middle of the night with the water black beneath him and the stars white above him and his wife somewhere ahead of him, lost in a foreign land, lost in a monastery, lost in the gap between who she had been and who she had become, Orhan Sahib spoke to the darkness. Even the star Zura could not guide you, he said. My Phosphorus, the words were quiet. The words were private. The words were the kind of words that a man speaks only when he believes no one is listening, when he lets the armor fall for just a moment, when he allows himself to be not a sultan but a husband, not a commander but a man who loves a woman and fears for her and does not understand why she has run from him. But someone was listening. Ivranov stepped out onto the deck and he saw his sultan standing there, and he understood what he was seeing, because Ivranov had his own losses, his own loves, his own scars that the world could not see. Aspur Khatun, Ivranov said gently, she has only fought against her fate, my sultan. The sultan fell silent. Not the silence of agreement, but the silence of a man wrestling with his own heart, trying to separate the anger from the sorrow, trying to understand how love can be both a bridge and a blade. And then, after a long time, after the ship had moved further across the dark water and the stars had shifted imperceptibly in the sky, the Sultan spoke again. Can anyone escape their fate, Ivranos? He asked. Can anyone outrun the decree that was written for them before they were born? Ivranos chose his words carefully, the way a man chooses his steps on a narrow mountain path with darkness on both sides. What she has endured is not easy, he said. She must have been terrified. The news of her father, his exile, his imprisonment, it must have broken something inside her that she did not know could break. The Sultan shook his head slowly, and the movement was heavy with the weight of things he had believed and now doubted. I thought I knew Aspocha, he said. I thought I understood her. I was wrong. She is not a woman who frightens easily. She is not a girl who makes rash decisions out of fear. This was something else. This was something deeper. Ivranos nodded. It is about her father, he said. When it is a matter of one's own people, the heart overpowers the mind. The blood speaks louder than reason. The Sultan's voice hardened, not with cruelty, but with the iron discipline that had made him who he was. She is my wife now, he said. Ivranos, neither I nor my family has the right to make mistakes, and we do not have the right to indulge our emotions at the cost of our duty. And Ivranos, hearing the judgment in those words, offered a counterweight. You forgive Fatima Khatun, he said, the Sultan to look at him, and in his eyes was something that Ivranos had rarely seen there. Vulnerability quickly masked, but present for a fleeting instant like a bird glimpsed through trees. Fatima is my only sister, the Sultan said. She is dearer to me than my own life. She is my father's trust, his legacy, the last piece of him that walks this earth. I cannot hand her over to just anyone. I cannot leave her to the mercy of a world that has no mercy. And then the Sultan paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, more deliberate, as if he were choosing each word the way a jeweler chooses stones, weighing them, testing their clarity, placing them precisely where they needed to be. Ivranos, he said, you were once my enemy, a dignified enemy, an honorable enemy. A man who fought against me not out of malice but out of loyalty to his own people, his own flag, his own understanding of the world. But now you are my friend, you saved my wife's life, you saved my child's life. You have fought under my banner with a devotion that puts many of my own born warriors to shame. The Sultan stepped closer, and the starlight caught the edge of his face, illuminating the lines that war and worry had carved there over the years. The day is coming, he continued, when I will entrust to you my life, my blood, and my sword. The day is coming when you will stand not beside me but in my place, carrying my authority in lands that I cannot reach, speaking with my voice in councils that I cannot attend. That day is close, Ivranos, closer than you know. And Ivranos, the former Byzantine commander, the man who had crossed from one world to another, who had abandoned the cross and embraced the crescent, who had traded one set of loyalties for another and found in that trade something he had never expected to find, peace, stood there on the deck of a ship under the stars and felt something move in his chest, something warm, something that he had thought was dead but that was only sleeping. Alhamdulillah, he said, and the word came from a place deeper than his throat, deeper than his lungs, from the very core of his being. Alhamdulillah, my Sultan. And then he said, after that, my only purpose, my only reason for breathing, my only ambition in this life is to die in the way of Allah on this soil, under this sky, with a sword in my hand and the Shahada on my lips. The Sultan looked at him for a long time, and in that look was everything that words could not carry: respect, love, the bond between two men who have faced death together and emerged on the other side changed, forged, made new. See, Ivranos, the Sultan said, the one who accepts his fate finds his own path. Aspocha did not accept her fate. Not the way you did. Not the way Fatima did. You did not rebel against me. You did not abandon your love. You waited, you were patient, you endured, and I am pleased with you. The Sultan's voice rose slightly, not in volume but in intensity, as if the words themselves were growing, becoming something larger than mere speech. Ivranos, he said, may Allah grant you long life so that you may build a happy home. In Rumeli you will be my strength and my shield. You will be the edge of my sword and the wall around my people. You will carry the banner where I cannot carry it, and you will hold the line where I cannot hold it, and the people of Rumeli will know my name through your deeds. Ivranos bowed his head, and when he raised it again, his eyes were bright, not with tears, because warriors do not weep, but with something deeper than tears. something that has no name in any language, the gratitude of a man who has been given a purpose worth dying for. May Allah keep your shadow over our heads always, my Sultan, he said, and the ship moved on through the darkness, cutting the black water, leaving a white wake that gleamed for a moment in the starlight and then vanished, as all things vanish, as all wakes vanish. As all journeys eventually come to their end, though the travelers do not yet know where that end will be or what it will cost them, and behind them on the shore they had left, Jarkatai Sahib walked with Shamal through the forest, and the grave of Bulan Sahib grew smaller in the distance, and the night grew deeper, and the trees grew taller, and the shadows between them grew darker, and somewhere in those shadows, enemies moved and allies moved, and the line between the two was thinner than a blade's edge and more dangerous than any army. And in the forest, at the first waypoint, Damiran's soldiers made camp. They lit fires, they posted guards, they unloaded their supplies and set up their tents and settled in for the night, confident in their numbers, confident in their weapons, confident in the belief that no one would dare attack them here in the heart of their own territory, surrounded by their own men. But in the trees around them, in the darkness that their fires could not reach, Halima Khatun was watching. She had arrived before them, taking the shorter path through the forest, moving faster than they had moved because she carried no supply train, no prisoners, no baggage. She carried only her will and her weapon and her faith, and these were lighter than any army's gear and stronger than any fortress's walls. She studied the camp. She counted the guards, she noted their positions, their rotations, the moments when their attention wavered, the blind spots in their patrol patterns. The Karachi soldiers are on guard, she whispered to her fighters who crouched beside her in the darkness. If they see me, they will recognize me. Bazian, you will go to the soldiers, engage them, talk to them, distract them, and I will slip in from behind, through the kitchen, through the supply area where they will not expect a threat. She paused and her eyes swept across the faces of the women and men who had followed her into this forest, into this danger, into this impossible mission. Do not create a scene, she said. Do not start a fight. If they realize what we are doing, they will take Dasun and disappear deeper into the forest and we will lose him. Silence is our weapon tonight. Patience is our shield. Allah is our guide. And the Bazian moved forward, stepping out of the shadows, transforming themselves from warriors into ordinary women, travelers, lost souls seeking warmth by a stranger's fire. They approached the camp with calculated innocence, their voices soft, their manner unthreatening, their true purpose hidden beneath layers of performance and deception. And Halima, alone in the darkness, began to move. She circled the camp, staying low, staying silent, using every tree and every stone and every fold of ground as cover. She was moving toward Dasun, toward the cage, toward the rescue that could change the balance of everything. And while Halima moved through the forest and the Salda crossed the dark water, and Aspurka stood in a monastery trying to reach her dying father, and Rakatai walked through the night with a grief for the world kept turning, and the stars kept burning, and the war kept waiting, patient as a wolf, hungry as fire, inevitable as the dawn that would come, whether any of them survived the night or not. And in the monastery, in the inner courtyard where soldiers stood guard and candles flickered, and the old emperor lay sick on a narrow bed in a narrow room, the sound of footsteps echoed on stone, and somewhere a door opened, and somewhere a woman whispered a prayer, and somewhere a blade was drawn from its sheath, and somewhere a horse ran riderless through the darkness, and somewhere a ship cut through black water under white stars, and somewhere a grave stood alone on a hill with the wind for company. And the war was not over. It had barely begun. The fire that had been lit in these days, in these nights, in these forests, and on these waters, and in these corridors of power and faith, that fire would burn for years, for decades, for centuries. It would consume empires and create new ones. It would swallow kings and elevate shepherds. It would rewrite maps and rename rivers and reshape the very bones of the earth. But tonight, in this moment, all of that was still ahead. Tonight, there was only the darkness and the stars and the sound of the wind and the beating of hearts that did not know whether they would still be beating when the sun came up.
As the final echoes of the funeral prayers faded into the vast silence of the night, Sultan Orhan Sahib stood motionless upon the blood-stained field, his silhouette carved against the torchlight like a statue forged from unyielding faith and iron will. The wind carried the scent of freshly turned earth, mingled with smoke and the distant cries of wounded men. Orhan Sahib now rested in the embrace of the soil, his soul returned to the Creator, yet the realm still bled. Orhan's hand rested upon the hilt of his sword, eyes scanning the darkened tree line where the enemy had vanished like shadows before dawn. Tarhan, his elite right hand an unwavering shadow, stood close by, blood still dripping from a shallow cut across his forearm, his gaze sharp as the edge of his blade. "My Sultan," Tarhan spoke quietly, voice low yet filled with fire, "the traitors flee, but they leave behind the scent of their fear. Yakid's veiled face has shown itself in deeds. Shall we hunt them through the night?" Orhan turned slowly, his expression a storm of justice and calculated patience. "Not yet, Tarhan. The night is their ally now, full of traps and hidden arrows. We rest our men, tend the wounded, and prepare. Tomorrow's sun shall witness the full weight of our response. Allah grants victory to the steadfast, not the reckless." Around them, captains moved with purpose, Damir Khan's men securing the perimeter, Mahmud organizing the gathering of weapons from the fallen, while Zarqatai paced like a caged lion, his fists clenched, eyes red from both battle and grief for Buran. Further back in the Ottoman camp, fires crackled as warriors tended to their brothers. Evrenos moved among them, offering words of strength and binding wounds. "Hold fast, brothers," he urged. "Orhan Sahib watches from above. Our steel carries his memory." The men murmured prayers, voices blending into a low, rhythmic hum beneath the stars, "Inna lillahi wa inna ilaihi raji'un," reminding every soul of their temporary stay upon this earth. Deep within the forest, where moonlight struggled to pierce the thick canopy, Shahanshah rode hard with his battered remnants. Damir Khan groaned in pain from his arrow wound as Mahmud supported him on horseback. The Shahanshah's face was twisted with rage and growing desperation. "Yakit," he hissed into the darkness. "Where is that serpent now? His arrows saved us tonight, yet his ambition may yet doom us all." They reached a hidden clearing where more Byzantine forces waited uneasily. Torches revealed faces marked by exhaustion and doubt. Shahanshah dismounted heavily, slamming his fist against a tree trunk. "We have lost Chana. Buran is dead, but so are too many of ours. Orhan grows stronger with every victory. We must turn this tide with cunning, not just steel." From the shadows emerged Yakid, his face still partially concealed, cloak heavy with dust. He bowed slightly, voice smooth yet edged with venom. "My lord Shahanshah, the ambush bought you time, but Orhan's dogs are relentless. I can strike from within if you grant me more men and gold." Shahanshah studied him coldly, sensing the growing hunger for power in the traitor's eyes, yet he had little choice. "Do what you must, but know this, failure will cost you more than your veiled face." Yakid smiled thinly beneath the cloth and melted back into the trees, his mind already weaving darker webs of betrayal. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of the Kanka hidden among ancient oaks, Princess Esportia returned under the cover of deeper night. Her horse's hooves were muffled by soft earth as she approached cautiously. The Byzantine guards recognized her and parted without question. Inside the dimly lit chamber, her father Shahanshah had briefly returned before riding out again, leaving Nikos bound and guarded. Esportia stood over the captive for long moments, her heart torn in two directions. Blood called to blood, yet the memory of Orhan's honor, his justice, and the growing bond with the Ottoman cause weighed upon her soul like divine decree. She whispered a prayer, fingers tracing the hilt of her hidden dagger, before slipping away once more, unresolved tears stinging her eyes. The forest swallowed her as she rode toward uncertain alliances. Back at the main Ottoman encampment near Bursa's outskirts, Sultan Orhan gathered his inner circle beneath a large tent illuminated by oil lamps. Tarhan stood at his right, ever vigilant. Zarqatai sat sharpening his axe with rhythmic scrapes, eyes burning with unresolved vengeance. Orhan Faladios, the fierce and ambitious commander whose rivalry with certain factions simmered quietly, leaned against a wooden post, arms crossed. Altuddin Saheb, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, and Abdul Rahman completed the council, their faces etched with the night's toll. "The enemy retreats towards stronger fortifications," Orhan began, his voice steady and commanding, carrying the weight of leadership. "Shahanshah is desperate. Yakid, that hidden dog, reveals himself as the poison in our midst. We have buried a great companion today, yet we cannot mourn long. The realm demands action. Tarhan, you will take a swift force and scout their retreat paths. Intercept any messengers. Zarqatai, strengthen our forward positions. Orhan Faladios, your men will guard the supply lines. Let no betrayal slip through." Orhan Faladios nodded, though a flicker of prideful tension crossed his face. "As you command, my sultan, but if Yakid shows himself again, grant me the honor of ending his treachery." Orhan met his gaze firmly. "Honor belongs to those who serve justice, not personal glory, Faladios. Remember that." The commander lowered his eyes in acknowledgement, yet the subtle rivalry lingered in the air like smoke. As the council dispersed, Orhan walked alone to a quiet rise overlooking the sleeping camp. Tarhan followed at a respectful distance. My sultan, Tarhan said softly, the men draw strength from you, but this war tests not only steel but hearts. Esportia, her loyalty wavers between father and husband, and Nilofar's pain echoes through the palace. Orhan sighed, gazing at the stars. Allah tests those he loves. I seek justice for the realm, not conquest for its own sake. Yakid's betrayal symbolizes the rot within. When we catch him, his fate shall serve as a warning to all traitors. Honor broken brings only ruin. He placed a hand on Tarhan's shoulder. You have intercepted arrows meant for me more than once, my brother. Your loyalty is a shield stronger than iron. Stay close in the days ahead. Dawn began to paint the eastern sky in faint hues of crimson and gold as riders returned with reports. Small skirmishes flared in the forests, Zarqatai's men clashing with rear guards, arrows flying once more. Everenos led a successful charge that scattered a supply convoy, capturing much-needed provisions. Yet Yakid's shadow haunted every path, his archers striking and vanishing like ghosts. In Bursa Palace, Nilafar Khatan had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, only to wake with renewed resolve. She visited Esportia's quarters, the two women sharing a tense yet honest exchange. My heart still burns, Nilafar admitted quietly, but for the sake of the children and the realm I shall not cast shadows. Esportia returned secretly, nodded with gratitude and inner turmoil. Then let us both serve with dignity, sister. The war outside mirrors the one within. Hours stretched into a long, tense day. Sultan Orhan led a reinforced column deeper into contested lands. The forest grew denser, ancient trees standing as silent witnesses. Suddenly, scouts reported movement ahead. Ambush, Tarhan shouted, intercepting a hail of arrows with his shield and swift horsemanship. Zarqatai roared into action, leading a thunderous charge. For Buran, for the faith, steel met steel once again in a fierce but short clash. Yakid's men were among the attackers, but the traitor himself slipped away, leaving behind dead and wounded. Orhan stood over a captured enemy fighter, voice grave. Tell your master justice approaches. No veil will hide him from Allah's decree or our blades. The man trembled but remained silent. They pressed on, morale high despite losses. As night fell once more, the army camped beside a flowing stream, its waters reflecting countless stars. Prayers rose in unison, Maghrib and Isha blending with the sounds of armor being repaired and horses tended. Orhan sat with his captains, planning the next phase, a bold push toward Shahanshah's weakening strongholds. We offer terms of honorable surrender to those willing, he declared. But for Yakid and unrepentant traitors, only the sword. Far away, Shahanshah paced in a dimly lit war tent, surrounded by uneasy allies. Orhan tightens the noose. We must call upon every reserve. Faladios may yet be turned if promises are sweet enough. Yakid lurked in the corner, whispering new schemes of infiltration and assassination. Desperation grew like a cancer. Princess Esportia, caught between worlds, rode secretly toward Orhan's camp under moonlight, her decision crystallizing with every stride. The realm teetered, loyalties fractured. Steel waited hungrily for the next clash. Yet the war was far from over. Greater battles loomed on the horizon, sieges that would shake mountains, betrayals that would test the purest souls, and moments of moral confrontation where honor itself would be weighed in the balance of fate. The night deepened, stars wheeled overhead, and the epic tale of Orhan Saheb, guardian of justice, continued its relentless march through blood, fire, and unyielding faith. As the first pale fingers of dawn clawed through the heavy canopy of the ancient forest, Sultan Orhan Saheb mounted his warhorse with the quiet authority of a man who carried the weight of nations upon his shoulders. The air was still thick with the residue of smoke and spilled blood from the previous night's clashes. Around him, the Ottoman camp stirred to life, warriors sharpening blades, tending to exhausted horses, and murmuring morning prayers that rose like incense toward the heavens. Tarhan rode at his right hand, ever watchful, his sharp eyes scanning every shadow between the trees for signs of Yakid's hidden archers. Zarqatai followed close behind, his face still etched with the grief of Buran Saheb's burial, yet his spirit burned hotter than the rising sun. My Sultan, Tarhan spoke in a low, resolute voice as their column advanced deeper into contested lands. Scouts report Shahanshah's forces regrouping near the old Byzantine outposts. Yakid's poison spreads among the hesitant captains. Some speak of surrender, others of desperate counterattacks. Orhan nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. Betrayal is a slow venom, Tarhan. It weakens the body before it kills the soul. We ride not only with steel but with justice. Allah does not grant victory to the treacherous. Today we press them until their masks fall completely. Behind them, Burhan Faladios commanded a strong flanking force, his expression proud yet carrying the subtle tension of a commander who hungered for greater recognition. Altadin Saheb, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, and Abdul Rahman led their respective units with disciplined precision, while Everenos and his Akinsai riders scouted far ahead like ghosts of the wind. The forest grew denser as the morning wore on. Birds fell silent as if the trees themselves sensed the approaching storm. Suddenly a distant horn echoed. Ambush, a scout cried. Arrows whistled from the undergrowth like angry hornets. Tarhan reacted instantly, spurring his horse forward and raising his shield to intercept a deadly shaft meant for Orhan. Protect the Sultan, he roared, his blade flashing as he cut down the first emerging attacker. Chaos erupted. Zarqatai unleashed a thunderous battle cry. For Buran, for the faith, charge! His men crashed into the enemy lines with the fury of lions. Steel clashed violently against steel. Horses screamed, men fell. Burhan Faladios led his detachment in a wide arc, smashing into the enemy's exposed flank with calculated ferocity. Push them back, he shouted. Show these dogs the price of treachery. Orhan fought at the center, his sword moving with experience, grace, and divine purpose. Each strike was measured, not born of blind rage but of justice. He parried a desperate blow from a Byzantine captain and drove his blade home. You fight for a crumbling empire, he called out amid the din. Lay down your arms and live with honor or perish with your lies. Some enemies hesitated, their morale cracking under the weight of Ottoman resolve. In the heart of the melee, a group of Yakid's veiled archers revealed themselves briefly before attempting to melt away. Zarqatai spotted their leader. There you are, serpent! He charged through the fray, axe swinging, cutting a path of retribution. One arrow grazed his shoulder, yet he pressed on, roaring oaths that shook the leaves. The ambushers broke and fled deeper into the woods, leaving many of their own behind. As the fighting subsided, Orhan's forces secured the ground. Bodies lay scattered like fallen leaves. The Sultan dismounted and walked among the wounded, offering water to friend and captured foe alike. Tend to them, he ordered his physicians. Even enemies are souls before Allah. Turhan approached, breathing heavily, blood on his sleeve from a new cut. We captured several, my Sultan. One claims knowledge of Yakid's next move. They brought the prisoner forward. The man, trembling, fell to his knees. Mercy, Sultan Orhan, Yakid plans to strike at your supply lines near the river crossing. He whispers to Shahanshah that Burhan Faladios can be bought if the price is high enough. Orhan's expression darkened like gathering thunder. So the rot spreads. Lift your head, man. Look me in the eyes. Will you stand with justice or continue drinking poison? The prisoner lowered his gaze in shame. Orhan turned to his captains. This war tests more than our blades. It tests our hearts. Burhan Faladios stepped forward. The fierce commander approached, his jaw tight. My Sultan. Your name has been spoken in the enemy's tents. Prove them wrong. Lead the defense of the supply caravans yourself. Let your loyalty silence every whisper. Burhan Faladios placed a hand over his heart. By Allah and by your trust I shall no gold will turn me from the path of honor. Yet in his eyes flickered the briefest shadow of prideful resentment at having to prove himself. Orhan saw it but chose wisdom over immediate confrontation. Then go with Allah's guidance. As the sun climbed higher, strategic decisions unfolded. Zarqatai took a mobile force to harass the retreating enemy, while Tarhan and a hand-picked group of elite riders, including Khalil and small units under Jarkata Sahib, slipped ahead to set their own ambushes. The forest became a chessboard of shadows and steel. Small clashes flared throughout the long day, arrows exchanged across clearings, charges through narrow passes, and quiet knife fights in the underbrush. Far away in Bursa, Nilafar Khatan walked the palace gardens with a sporcha. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and unspoken pain. My heart still aches, Nilafar confessed softly, stopping beside a fountain whose waters reflected their troubled faces. Yet I see now the greater trial. The realm needs unity. Our children need peace within these walls if their fathers are to fight without. Sporcha, her eyes red from sleepless nights, nodded. I rode to the Konka last night. My father, he holds Nikos still. Blood pulls at me, yet I see the justice in Orhan's cause. Betrayal festers in my father's camp. Yakid manipulates him like a puppet master. I fear for all of us. The two women shared a long, silent look, rivals by circumstance, perhaps sisters by fate, before returning inside to tend to the children and pray for the warrior's safety. As evening approached, Sultan Orhan's main column reached the strategic river crossing. The water rushed dark and swift, reflecting the orange hues of sunset. Scouts reported Shahanshah's forces gathering on the far bank. They prepare to make a stand, Abdul Rahman reported, riding in dusty and weary. Yakid, archers line the tree line. Orhan raised his hand. We do not charge blindly. Prepare positions. Send a messenger under truce flag. A rider carrying a white banner crossed the river under tense watch. He delivered Orhan's words. Shahanshah, lay down arms and spare your people further suffering. Justice can still prevail. Hand over the traitor Yakid and face honorable terms. The reply came swiftly, an arrow embedded in the ground near the messenger's feet, carrying a defiant note. Shahanshah's handwriting shook with desperation. I will not kneel before a rising power built on my ruins. Yakid serves the greater cause. Night fell once more, thick and oppressive. Torches and campfires dotted both sides of the river like rival constellations. Orhan gathered his captains again. Tomorrow we cross at first light. Tarhan, you will lead the vanguard and intercept arrows as always. Zarqatai, your fury will break their center. Burhan Faladios, guard our rear with vigilance. Let no internal betrayal surprise us. Zarqatai gripped his axe tightly. My Sultan, Buran's blood cries for vengeance. I will carve through them until Yakid's veiled face lies exposed in the mud. Orhan placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. Vengeance belongs to Allah. We fight for justice and the realm. Control your rage, or it will control you. The commander bowed his head, tears of grief and fury mixing in his eyes. Deep in the enemy camp across the river, Shahanshah paced like a caged wolf. Orhan tightens the noose, our reserves dwindle. Yakid stood in the shadows, face still hidden. Give me 50 of your best archers and permission to slip across at midnight. I can assassinate key captains, perhaps even wound Orhan himself. Shahanshah stared at him long and hard, sensing the growing danger and trusting this man, yet desperation won. Go, but if you fail, do not return. Yakid smiled beneath his veil and vanished into the night with a small group of killers. Meanwhile, Princess Esportia made her fateful choice. Under the cover of darkness, she rode hard toward Orhan's camp, evading her father's patrols. Her heart pounded with every hoofbeat. Upon reaching the outer sentries, she declared, I seek Sultan Orhan. Tell him Esportia comes not as enemy, but as one seeking truth and justice. The guards escorted her forward under heavy watch. When she stood before Orhan in the firelight, her voice trembled yet carried strength. My Sultan, my husband in the eyes of the realm, my father's cause crumbles under betrayal. Yakid plots even now. I offer what knowledge I have, and my sword if you will accept it. The blood tie pains me, but honor demands I stand against poison. Orhan studied her for a long moment, the weight of fate heavy between them. You walk a difficult path, Esportia. Allah tests loyalties tonight. Stay under protection. Your knowledge may save many souls tomorrow. Orhan watched carefully, hand near his sword, ever ready to intercept any threat. As midnight deepened, Yakid's assassins crept toward the Ottoman positions. But Orhan's scouts had been vigilant. A fierce, close-quarter skirmish erupted in the darkness, blades in the shadows, muffled cries, steel meeting flesh. Orhan himself intercepted 2 attackers heading toward Orhan's tent, his swords dancing with lethal precision. For the Sultan, he shouted as he felled the last of them. Zarquatai joined the fray, his axe claiming bloody retribution. One captured assassin revealed Yakid's location before breathing his last. He watches from the eastern ridge. Dawn broke with the sound of war horns. The river crossing became a scene of epic violence. Ottoman forces advanced under covering arrow fire. Boats and swimmers crossed while Zarquatai led a daring charge across a shallow ford. The water ran red. Intense combat raged along the banks, swords flashing, shields crashing, men roaring invocations to Allah. Orhan Faladios held the rear steadfastly, repelling a surprise counterthrust and proving his loyalty in blood. Orhan fought in the thick of it, his presence inspiring the men. Hold the faith, justice is with us. Shahanshah's lines buckled under the pressure. Yakid was spotted on the ridge, losing arrows desperately. Zarquatai charged toward him with primal fury, but the traitor escaped once more into the forest, leaving chaos behind. By midday, the crossing was secured. Shahanshah retreated further, his forces shattered and morale broken. Ottoman casualties were tended with care, prayers rose for the fallen. Orhan stood victorious yet somber, looking toward the horizon. This battle is won, but the war continues. Yakid still breathes. Shahanshah plots in the shadows. Greater sieges await us. Esportia approached, her hands stained from aiding the wounded. My Sultan, my father grows more desperate. He may burn villages to deny you supplies. Orhan nodded. Then we move with both mercy and strength. The realm shall heal under just rule. The sun set once again on a bloodied yet advancing front. Fires crackled. Warriors rested, but tension remained. Nilafar, far away, prayed for unity. Orhan Faladios sharpened his blade with new determination. Orhan stood guard as always. Zarquatai whispered vows of vengeance for Buran. The night deepened, heavy with promise and peril. Betrayal still lurked. Honor faced new trials. The epic struggle for the realm, fought in forests, palaces, and human hearts, marched relentlessly onward, its final chapters still hidden beyond the smoke of war. As the crimson sun bled across the western sky, painting the river waters in hues of fire and blood, Sultan Orhan Sahib stood upon the newly secured bank, his armor dented and streaked with the marks of hard combat. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet earth, smoke, and victory's bitter cost. Bodies of friend and foe alike lay scattered along the shores, while Ottoman warriors moved with weary purpose, dragging wounded comrades from the reddened waters and offering prayers over the fallen. Orhan remained at his sultan's side, breathing hard, a fresh cut across his cheek still seeping, yet his eyes burned with unyielding vigilance. Zarquatai paced nearby like a wounded lion, axe still dripping, his grief for Buran Sahib now mixed with the fire of fresh triumph. The crossing is ours, my sultan, Orhan reported, voice rough from shouting commands across the chaos. Shahanshah's lines have broken. He flees deeper into the old territories, but Yakid slipped away once more through the eastern ridges like the coward he is. Orhan wiped his blade slowly, his gaze fixed on the darkening forest beyond the river. Allah granted us this ground today, Tarhan, yet every victory carries a heavier burden. The enemy grows more desperate, and desperate men commit greater sins. Send scouts, we pursue at first light, but not blindly. Mercy to those who surrender, steel to those who cling to betrayal. He turned to the assembled captains. Orhan Bey'i stood tall among them, chest heaving, his sword arm bloodied from holding the rear with iron discipline. You proved your loyalty this day, Bey'i, let no man question it again. The commander bowed deeply, yet a shadow of pride lingered in his eyes, a quiet hunger for greater command that did not escape Orhan's notice. As night fully claimed the land, the Ottoman camp rose along the river like a fortress of fire and faith. Torches and lanterns flickered in long rows while physicians worked tirelessly by lamplight, stitching wounds and setting broken bones. Prayers of Maghrib and Isha rose in unified waves, voices strong despite exhaustion. Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. Everenos moved among the men, offering words of encouragement and sharing water. Altuddin Saheb, Tamir Boga, Mustafa, Abdul Rahman, and Jarkata Saheb organized watches and supply distribution. Khalil stood guard near the command tent, his face solemn after the day's fierce fighting. Inside the tent, Sultan Orhan gathered his inner circle. Sporcha sat quietly in the corner, her presence still new and heavy with unspoken tension. She had washed the dust of travel from her face but could not cleanse the conflict in her heart. My father will not yield easily, she said softly, eyes downcast. He speaks of burning villages and poisoning wells before letting you advance. Yakid fuels his ear with promises of secret alliances and assassins. He is no longer the ruler I once knew. Only a shadow manipulated by ambition. Orhan studied her for a long moment, the firelight dancing across his resolute features. You have chosen a painful path this night, Sporcha, blood against honor. May Allah ease your trial and reward your courage. Your knowledge may yet spare many innocent lives. Orhan watched her carefully, hand never far from his sword, ready to intercept any threat born of divided loyalties. Far across the darkened hills, in a hastily fortified camp surrounded by anxious Byzantine guards, Shahanshah slammed his fist upon a wooden table, maps and wine cups scattering. His face was gaunt, eyes wild with growing panic. Orhan crosses rivers as if Allah himself parts the waters for him. How many more defeats must we suffer? Damir Khan, still weak from his earlier wound, sat propped against cushions. Mahmud stood nearby, silent and grim. My lord, Mahmud ventured, our men whisper of surrender. Morale collapses with every lost battle. Shahanshah turned on Yakid, who had returned from the failed assassination attempt, his cloak torn and face still veiled. And you, your arrows promised salvation, yet here we sit like cornered rats. What use are your shadows now? Yakid's voice slithered through the tent, smooth yet laced with venom. Patience, great Shahanshah. One well-placed blade or poisoned arrow can end empires. Give me freedom to move among the neutral lords. I will turn Orhan Bey'i or create division in Orhan's own house. The Sultan's palace already carries whispers of jealousy between Nilafar and Sporcha. We can widen that crack into a chasm. Shahanshah stared long into the traitor's eyes, sensing the danger of relying on such a man, yet desperation clouded his judgment. Do it, but know this, if you fail me again, I will unmask you before the wolves. Yakid bowed and disappeared into the night with a small band of loyal cutthroats, his mind already spinning webs of deceit. The following dawn broke with renewed purpose. Sultan Orhan's army advanced in disciplined columns, banners of the crescent fluttering in the morning breeze. Orhan led the vanguard, riding ahead with elite scouts to clear paths and intercept hidden threats. Zarqatai commanded the center, his presence alone inspiring fear in enemy hearts. Orhan Bey'i guarded the supply trains and rear with fresh determination, proving his worth after the previous day's test. The march stretched long and grueling through dense woodland and rolling hills scarred by previous battles. By midday, they reached the outskirts of a strategic village nestled in a fertile valley. Smoke rose from several homes. Shahanshah's men had begun their scorched earth retreat. Orhan raised his hand. Save what you can, protect the people. Ottoman warriors rushed forward. Fierce skirmishes erupted in the narrow streets as small enemy detachments tried to complete the destruction. Orhan charged through flames, intercepting arrows and cutting down saboteurs. For the realm, he cried, his blade a blur of justice. Zarqatai smashed through a barricade, roaring oaths that echoed off burning walls. You burn what Allah gave to the innocent, face me. In one harrowing moment, a group of villagers trapped in a blazing mosque cried for help. Sporcha, riding with the column, spurred her horse forward without hesitation, joining Orhan and a squad of Sipahis to rescue them. She dragged an elderly woman from the flames, her own hands scorched, tears mixing with soot on her face. I will not let my father's desperation murder the faithful, she whispered fiercely. Orhan witnessed her courage from afar and nodded with quiet approval. As the village was secured and fires brought under control, a captured enemy officer was brought before the Sultan. Shahanshah moves toward the old fortress of Karakahisar, the man revealed under pressure. He plans to make his final stand there, calling upon every remaining ally. Orhan turned to his captains. Then we march without delay, but we offer one final chance for honorable surrender. Send heralds ahead. The army pressed onward, the long column stretching like a steel serpent through the land. Hours turned into a grueling march under the sun, then into a tense evening trek beneath emerging stars. Prayers were offered on horseback. Bread and water were shared. Stories of Buran Sahab's bravery were told around small fires to lift weary spirits. That night, in a quiet moment away from the main camp, Nilofar's influence reached even the front through a trusted messenger. A letter arrived for Esporcha, written in careful pain script. Esporcha read it by lamplight, tears falling. She struggles still, Esporcha told Orhan later, voice soft. Yet she chooses the realm above her pain. She asks that I protect the children as my own if fate demands it. Orhan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then let both of you find strength and faith. The palace must stand united while we fight out here. Deep in the forest shadows, Yakid struck again. His assassins infiltrated a small Ottoman scouting party, killing 2 men silently before Turhan's sharp instincts uncovered the plot. A brutal night fight erupted beneath the trees, blades in darkness, whispers of steel, sudden cries cut short. Turhan dueled one attacker hand-to-hand, disarming him and forcing a confession. Yakid aims for Burhan Faladio's next, promises of land and title. Orhan summoned Burhan Faladio's immediately. The serpent tempts you, what say you? The fierce commander knelt, voice steady. My sultan, I live and die for the realm you build. Let them come, I will greet them with steel. Orhan studied him carefully. Then stand vigilant. Honor is tested most when no one watches. The next morning brought the looming silhouette of Karacahisar fortress against the horizon, ancient walls scarred by time and previous wars. Shahanshah's banners flew defiantly from the towers. Ottoman forces began encirclement, setting up siege lines with disciplined precision. Catapults were assembled. Archers took positions. Zarqatai eyed the walls with burning intensity. Buran's spirit demands we take this place. As siege engines groaned into place and the first stones flew toward the battlements, Shahanshah stood atop the highest tower, watching the news tight. Yakid whispered at his side. Desperation had now fully claimed the ruler's heart. Inside the fortress, fear spread among the defenders. Outside, Orhan rode along the lines, inspiring his men with calm authority. We fight not for conquest alone, but for a just realm where betrayal finds no home. Allah is with the patient and the righteous. The siege had begun. Arrows flew both ways. Ladders rose against stone, the air filled with the thunder of war machines and the cries of combat. Turhan led the first assault wave, shield raised, intercepting death from above. Zarqatai roared at the forefront. Burhan Faladios held critical positions against potential sorties. Esporcha tended the wounded and offered strategic counsel born of intimate knowledge of her father's mind. Far away in Bursa, Nilafar Khatan stood in prayer, tears falling as she begged for unity and victory. The realm held its breath. Yet even as stones crashed against ancient walls and blood began to flow once more, the greater war continued its merciless march. Loyalties would face fire, hearts would be weighed. Justice and betrayal prepared for their final confrontation beneath the smoke-filled skies of Karacahisar. The night would soon deepen again, carrying with it the echoes of steel, prayer, and the unyielding wheel of fate. As the siege of Karacahisar tightened its iron grip beneath a sky heavy with gathering storm clouds, Sultan Orhan Sahib rode slowly along the forward lines, his warhorse stepping carefully over freshly dug trenches and scattered stones. The ancient fortress loomed ahead like a wounded giant, its high walls scarred by centuries of conflict, and now freshly bruised by the Ottoman catapults that thundered without mercy. Dust and smoke rose in thick columns, choking the air and turning day into a perpetual twilight of war. The sound of stones smashing against battlements echoed like the wrath of judgment itself, while arrows flew in both directions like swarms of angry hornets seeking flesh. Turhan remained glued to his sultan's side, shield ever ready, eyes scanning the parapets for the next deadly volley. The walls are strong, my sultan, but their spirit weakens. We have seen men deserting from the postern gates under cover of night. Yet Yakid's archers still command the eastern tower. They fight like cornered wolves. Orhan lifted his gaze to the fortress, voice steady as mountain rock. Then we press them until the wolves have no ground left. Allah grants victory not to the loudest roar, but to the most patient heart. Prepare the next assault for when the sun begins to fall. We strike when their eyes grow heavy with fear. Nearby, Zarqatai oversaw the positioning of heavier siege engines, his massive frame covered in sweat and grime, muscles straining as he helped haul ropes and timber. His eyes burned with the memory of Buran Sahab's fresh grave. For every stone we cast, he growled, let them remember the blood they spilled at Chana. Orhan Faladios commanded the western sector with fierce energy, driving his men to dig protective earthworks and ready scaling ladders. Though he had proven his loyalty at the river crossing, the shadow of Yakid's earlier temptation still lingered in the minds of some captains. He moved among his warriors with sharp commands, yet his pride simmered beneath the surface like coals waiting for air. Faster, he barked. The Sultan watches. Let no man say Faladios held back when honor called. Inside the besieged fortress, Shahanshah paced the cold stone halls of the keep like a man already haunted by defeat. Torches flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to mock his dwindling power. Daimir Khan lay upon a makeshift bed, feverish from his infected wound, while Mahmud stood guard at the window, watching the Ottoman news tight. "We cannot hold forever," Mahmud said quietly. "Supplies run low." The men speak openly now of Orhan's mercy. Shahanshah whirled on him, eyes wild with desperation. "Mercy from the man who stole my daughter and my lands? Never. Yakid, where is that veiled serpent?" Yakid emerged from the shadows, his face still concealed, cloak stained with the filth of secret movements. "I am here, my lord. I have spoken with certain captains inside these walls. Some may open a gate for gold and promises of position under a new order. But time grows short. Orhan's dog Tarhan intercepts too many of my messengers, and the princess Asporcha fights beside him now. Your own blood turns against you." The Shahanshah's face twisted in pain and rage. "My daughter has chosen her path. If she stands with Orhan, then she too shall taste the fire of betrayal. Send word to any who still waver. Tell them Orhan's realm is built on sand. Offer them titles, land, whatever it takes. And prepare the Greek fire. If we cannot hold Karakahasar, we shall make its fall a pyre they remember for generations." Outside, as the sun dipped lower and painted the sky in blood-red streaks, the Ottoman assault began in earnest. War horns sounded deep and mournful across the valley. Orhan led the first wave toward the western gate, running beneath a storm of arrows with shield raised high. "Interceptors forward," he commanded. His elite swordsmen formed a moving wall of wood and iron, catching shaft after shaft meant for the climbers. Ladders slammed against stone. Men swarmed upward like ants claiming a fallen giant. Zarqatai charged at the head of a battering ram crew, his voice rising above the din like thunder from the heavens. "For Burin Sahab, for the faith, break their bones as they broke our trust." The ram smashed rhythmically against the reinforced gates, each impact shaking the ancient walls. Defenders poured boiling oil and rolled stones from above, screams rising as men fell and were crushed. Yet the Ottomans pressed on, invoking Allah's name with every step. In the midst of the fury, Asporcha moved among the wounded behind the lines, binding gashes and offering water, her hands steady despite the chaos. A young warrior cried out in agony from an arrow wound. She knelt beside him. "Hold on, brother. The Sultan's physicians come. Your sacrifice will not be forgot." Her heart tore with every cry, each fallen man a reminder of her father's desperate stand. From a concealed position on the eastern ridge, Yakid loosed arrow after arrow with deadly precision, his veiled face hidden behind a crenellation. One shaft nearly found Sultan Orhan, only for Tarhan to intercept it at the last moment, the arrow splintering against his shield. "He aims for you again, my Sultan," Tarhan shouted. Orhan raised his sword high. "Let him aim. Allah protects the just. Advance." Night fell fully upon the siege, turning the battlefield into a hellish landscape of fire and shadow. Ottoman engineers had set great bonfires to light the walls, revealing defenders scrambling like ghosts. A desperate sortie burst from a hidden sally port. Byzantine warriors led by a loyal captain charged into Burhan Faladios' sector, hopping to burn the siege engines. Fierce hand-to-hand combat erupted in the trenches. Burhan Faladios met them head-on, sword flashing. "You think to break us from within? Face me!" He dueled their leader with savage skill, finally cutting him down, yet took a deep gash across his thigh in return. His men rallied and drove the sortie back, but the cost was heavy. Sultan Orhan visited the wounded commander as physicians worked. "You held the line, Faladios. Rest now. Your pride has earned respect this night." Burhan gritted his teeth against the pain. "I fight for the realm, not for glory alone, my Sultan." Yet even in his weakness, the flicker of ambition remained. As the long night deepened, Princess Asporcha approached Orhan at the command post. Firelight danced across her face, revealing exhaustion and inner torment. "My Sultan," she said quietly, voice trembling yet resolute, "my father prepares Greek fire. He will burn everything rather than surrender. I know the weak points in the eastern wall, old cracks from past earthquakes. A concentrated push there before dawn might break them without total slaughter." Orhan studied her long and hard, weighing trust against blood. "You offer your father's doom with your own hands. This choice will haunt your soul. Are you prepared for that burden before Allah?" Asporcha lowered her head, tears falling. "I am. Justice must prevail over blood, or the realm will drown in endless war. But I beg you, offer him one final chance to surrender with honor." Orhan nodded. "A herald will go at first light. If he refuses, we strike where you say." He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You walk the path of the righteous, Asporcha. May Allah grant you peace." Back in Bursa, far from the thunder of siege, Nilafar Khatun walked the silent corridors of the palace, her child cradled in her arms. Sleep evaded her. The weight of Malhan's words still echoed. The realm must come first. She knelt in the prayer hall, forehead touching the cool carpet. "O Allah, protect Orhan, unite our hearts. Let no jealousy or shadow divide what must stand strong." Asporcha's empty chambers nearby reminded her of the fragile unity they now attempted to build. Servants moved quietly, carrying reports of the siege. Every distant rumor tightened the knot in her chest. Dawn broke gray and ominous. The herald approached the gates under truce, bearing Orhan's final offer. Surrender Karakhasar, hand over the traitor Yakid, accept honorable terms and live. Continue this path and face the full wrath of justice. From the walls, Shahanshah's reply came in the form of a severed head thrown at the herald's feet, one of his own captains who had spoken of surrender. Tell Orhan there will be no kneeling, the Shahanshah screamed from above. Only fire and death. The final assault began. Catapults hurled massive stones, arrows darkened the sky. Orhan led climbers toward the eastern breach Asportia had revealed. Zarqatai roared at the forefront once more, axe-cleaving defenders who dared stand against him. Your time ends here, servants of betrayal. Burhan Faladios, bandaged and pale, insisted on commanding his sector from horseback, driving his men forward with renewed fire. Intense fighting raged across the battlements. Steel rang, men screamed, bodies tumbled from the walls. Yakid fought like a cornered animal, losing his final arrows before descending into the chaos to escape. Orhan spotted him and gave chase across the smoke-filled courtyard. Your veiled reign of poison ends today, traitor. Their blades met in a furious duel amid falling debris. Yakid fought with desperate cunning, but Orhan's loyalty and skill proved greater. A decisive thrust sent the traitor staggering back, wounded and unmasked at last, his face revealed as the coward it always hid. Yet in the confusion, Yakid slipped through a narrow passage and vanished into the lower levels, leaving a trail of blood. As Ottoman banners rose over sections of the wall and the fortress began to fall, Shahanshah retreated to the highest tower with his last loyal guards. Desperation had consumed him entirely. If Karakhasar falls, he whispered, let it fall upon our enemies. Flames began to rise from within, Greek fire spread by his own hand. Sultan Orhan, seeing the growing inferno, commanded with urgent authority, save those who wish to be saved, extinguish what you can, justice, not vengeance. His warriors poured into the fortress, pulling defenders from flames even as fighting continued in pockets. Zarqatai reached the inner keep, eyes blazing. Asportia stood beside Orhan, watching her father's last stand with tears streaming down her face. Orhan returned, breathing heavily. Yakid lives still, my sultan, wounded but escaped into the tunnels. Orhan raised his sword toward the tower. The fortress is nearly ours, yet greater trials remain. Shahanshah's desperation reveals his true face. We take this place, but we do not become the monsters we fight. Smoke rose high into the sky as the long day of battle continued. Prayers mixed with cries, honor clashed with survival. The siege of Karakhasar had reached its bloody climax, but the war for the soul of the realm burned hotter than any fire. Yakid's still breath poisoned somewhere in the shadows. Shahanshah prepared his final act. Loyalty stood on the edge of a blade, and far away, Nilafar prayed for the dawn that might bring unity or further heartbreak. The night would soon fall again upon a conquered yet wounded fortress, and the epic tale of Orhan Sahib marched onward through smoke, steel, tears, and unyielding faith, its end still veiled in the uncertain future. The night had not yet released its grip on the world when the first movement came from the tree line. It was subtle, barely a whisper of cloth against bark, barely a shift of shadow against deeper shadow, but Halima Khatun saw it because Halima Khatun saw everything. She had trained her eyes in the camps of Ertugrul Ghazi, where a moment of blindness could mean a blade in the throat, where the difference between life and death was the ability to notice what others missed. And what she noticed now, crouched in the undergrowth with the damp earth pressing against her knees and the cold air pressing against her face, was that the guards at the northern edge of the camp had shifted their attention. The Bazian had done their work. 3 of them had approached the camp from the eastern road, their voices carrying the practiced weariness of travelers lost in the forest, women seeking shelter, seeking warmth, seeking the mercy of armed men who might, if their mood was right, offer a place by the fire and a cup of water before sending them on their way. And the soldiers, Damerhan's soldiers, Karachi's soldiers, men who had been riding all day and fighting all week and carrying the weight of defeat on their shoulders like wet wool, these soldiers had turned toward the voices, had stepped away from their posts, had allowed their discipline to slip for just a moment, just a heartbeat, just long enough. Halima moved. She rose from the undergrowth like something born from the earth itself, like a jinn emerging from the soil, and she moved with the silence of a woman who understood that silence was not merely the absence of sound but a weapon, a tool, a living thing that could be wielded as skillfully as any blade. She crossed the open ground between the tree line and the rear of the camp in 7 steps, each step placed with the precision of a surgeon's cut, each foot finding solid ground, avoiding the dry twigs, avoiding the loose stones, avoiding everything that might betray her presence to the ears of men who were trained to listen for exactly this kind of approach. She reached the supply area, the rough collection of sacks and barrels and cooking implements that the soldiers had unloaded from their horses and arranged in a crude semicircle near the center of the camp. The fire here had burned low, reduced to embers that glowed orange in the darkness like the eyes of some sleeping beast, and the smoke that rose from those embers was thin and gray and carried the smell of burnt mutton fat and pine resin. Halima pressed herself against a stack of grain sacks and waited, her breathing controlled, her heartbeat steady, her mind clear. From here she could see Darsoon's cage. It stood on the far side of the fire, a crude construction of wooden poles lashed together with rope barely large enough for a man to sit upright. And inside it Darsoon sat with his head bowed, and his wrists raw from the bindings and his body still carrying the bruises of whatever rough treatment Damerhan's men had administered during the journey. 2 guards stood near the cage, their spears planted in the earth, their postures the slouched postures of men who expected nothing to happen, who believed that the forest around them was empty of threat, who had grown comfortable in the assumption of their own safety. Halima studied them. She noted the angle of their bodies, the direction of their gaze, the rhythm of their movements as they shifted their weight from foot to foot as they turned their heads to watch the interaction between the Bazian and the other soldiers. She calculated the distance. She measured the time. She weighed the risks against the rewards and found that the balance, while precarious, tipped in her favor. But she could not move yet, not yet. The 2 guards were still too alert, still too close to Darsoon, still too capable of raising an alarm that would bring every soldier in the camp running with drawn swords and murder in their eyes. She needed them to move. She needed them to be pulled away, even for a few seconds, even for the space of a single breath, and in that space she would act. And then it happened. One of the Bazian, a woman whose name was known only to those who fought beside her, a woman who had lost 2 brothers and a husband to the wars and who carried her grief not as a burden but as fuel, this woman raised her voice at the edge of the camp. She spoke in the dialect of the region, the rough trader's tongue that was spoken in the markets and the caravanserais, and she said something that caught the attention of the 2 guards near the cage, something about danger on the road. Something about bandits, something about horsemen seen in the forest to the south. The guards exchanged a glance. One of them stepped forward toward the commotion, his hand on his sword, his attention drawn away from the cage. The other hesitated, torn between his duty and his curiosity, and in that hesitation Halima saw her moment. She moved like water flowing downhill, inevitable, unstoppable, finding the path of least resistance with an instinct that was older than thought. She reached the cage from behind, where the shadows were deepest, where the firelight did not reach, and she pressed her face against the wooden bars. Darsoon, she breathed. His head came up, his eyes, bloodshot and swollen, found hers in the darkness, and in them she saw surprise and relief and something else, something harder to name, the look of a man who has been given back a piece of himself that he thought was lost forever. Halima Katan, he whispered. Listen to me, she said, and her voice was the voice of command, the voice that brooks no argument, the voice that expects obedience and receives it. We are going to get you out, but not yet, not this moment. The guards are too close and our numbers are too few for a direct assault. I need you to be ready. When the signal comes, you must move fast. Can you move? Darsoon tested his limbs, shifting in the cage, wincing as bruised muscles protested and raw skin scraped against rough wood. I can move, he said. Good, Halima said, then be ready, and trust in Allah. And then she was gone again, retreating into the shadows, retreating into the darkness, retreating into the space between the firelight and the forest where neither the soldiers nor the night could find her. She moved back to the tree line, back to her position, back to the place where she could see the whole camp laid out before her like a map, and she began to plan. The Bazian were still engaged with the soldiers, still talking, still weaving their web of distraction, and the soldiers were responding with the rough hospitality of fighting men who have been too long without female company, offering food, offering fire, offering the kind of attention that is half courtesy and half appetite. It was buying time, but time was a currency that ran out quickly, and Halima knew that she could not sustain this deception indefinitely. Sooner or later, one of the soldiers would grow suspicious. Sooner or later, someone would notice that these women had appeared from nowhere, that their story did not hold together, that their eyes were too sharp and their hands too steady for ordinary travelers. She turned to the fighters beside her, the small band of warriors who had followed her into this forest, who had left the safety of the camp and the protection of the Sultan's banner to accompany this woman on a mission that most men would have called foolish and most commanders would have called suicidal. Here is what we will do, she said, and her voice was low but utterly clear, each word placed with the same precision she had used when crossing the open ground. When the moon reaches that gap in the trees, she pointed upward, where a break in the canopy allowed a sliver of sky to show through. We move. 3 of you will circle to the north and create a disturbance. Nothing dramatic, a thrown stone, a snapped branch, something that draws the guards away from the cage but does not alarm the entire camp. 2 of you will go with me to the cage. We cut the ropes, we take Darsoon, and we disappear into the forest. No fighting unless there is no other choice, no killing unless a life depends on it. We are not here for glory, we are here for Darsoon. Do you understand? They understood. Each one of them nodded, and in those nods was the kind of loyalty that cannot be bought or commanded but can only be earned, the loyalty of people who follow not because they are ordered to, but because they believe with every fiber of their being that the person leading them is worthy of their trust and their lives. And so they waited. They waited as the moon moved slowly across the sky, its light filtering through the canopy in shifting patterns of silver and shadow. They waited as the fire burned lower and the soldiers grew drowsier and the Bazian continued their performance at the edge of the camp. They waited as the forest breathed around them, the trees creaking in the wind, the insects humming in the undergrowth, the owls calling to each other across the darkness in voices that sounded like the whispers of ghosts. And while they waited in another place across the water, in the stone corridors of the monastery, Esportia was moving through a world of candles and shadows, and the soft echoing footsteps of nuns who walked with their heads bowed and their hands clasped, and their lives dedicated to God who, in Esportia's experience, seemed to answer prayers only when it suited him and remained silent the rest of the time. Sophia led the way. The nun moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every stone in these walls, every turn in these corridors, every creaking floorboard and every draft that blew through the cracks in the masonry. She had lived in this monastery for 20 years, had come here as a girl of 14 with nothing but a torn dress and a broken heart, and had found within these walls something that the outside world had never given her: purpose, peace, the certainty that her life had meaning even if that meaning was invisible to everyone but God. But tonight, purpose and peace were secondary to survival. Tonight, Sophia was leading a princess through a labyrinth of stone toward a room where an emperor lay dying, and the soldiers who guarded that room had orders to let no one pass, and those orders came from men who did not distinguish between disobedience and treason. "This way," Sophia whispered, turning down a narrow passage that Esportia had not noticed, a passage hidden behind a tapestry that depicted the fall of Constantinople to the Persians, a tapestry so old that the colors had faded to ghosts of themselves, and the figures in the weaving looked more like memories than men. The passage was dark. The walls were close enough to touch on both sides, and the ceiling was low enough that Esportia had to duck her head, and the floor was uneven stone that had been worn smooth by centuries of secret feet. Sophia moved through this darkness without hesitation, without a candle, guided by touch and memory and the kind of intimate knowledge that comes only from long habitation. Esportia followed, one hand on the wall, the other hand reaching ahead into the darkness, and with each step she felt herself moving deeper into the monastery, deeper into the stone, deeper into a place where the outside world and all its wars and betrayals seemed very far away. They emerged into a small courtyard, open to the sky but surrounded on all sides by high walls topped with iron spikes. The courtyard was lit by a single torch that burned in a bracket near a heavy wooden door, and in front of that door stood two soldiers. Byzantine soldiers wearing the armor of the new regime, the armor of the men who had overthrown Esportia's father and seized his throne and cast him into this prison of stone and silence. Esportia pressed herself against the wall in the shadow of an archway and watched the soldiers with the cold, calculating eyes of a woman who had grown up in a palace where assassination was a political tool and every smiling face might conceal a knife. Sophia touched her arm. "Wait here," she said. "I will go to them. They are accustomed to my presence. I bring food and medicine to your father every evening at this hour. They will not be surprised to see me, but you must be ready to move when I give you the signal." "What signal?" Esportia whispered. "When I drop the tray," Sophia said. "When you hear the sound of breaking pottery, move. The door will be open. Go through it. Go to your father. I will keep the soldiers occupied for as long as I can." Esportia looked at the nun, at this woman who owed her nothing, who risked everything, who was willing to place her life between a princess and an army for no reason other than gratitude and faith. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Sophia smiled, and the smile was sad and beautiful and brave all at once. "Because your father once saved this monastery," she said. "Because when the treasury was empty and the bishop wanted to close our doors and scatter us to the winds, your father sent gold. He sent soldiers to protect our walls. He sent a decree that no one was to touch us, that our land was sacred, that our work was holy. We owe him our existence, and a debt like that is not forgot. Not by women who spend their lives remembering." And then Sophia was gone, walking across the courtyard toward the soldiers, carrying a tray of bread and water and a small clay pot of medicine, her footsteps measured, her posture calm, her face composed into the serene mask of a woman of God who has no thoughts beyond prayer and service. The soldiers looked up as she approached. They recognized her. They stepped aside. One of them opened the door and Sophia walked through it, and for a moment the doorway was a rectangle of golden light in the dark wall, and then the door swung half-closed behind her, and Esportia was alone in the courtyard with two armed men and the beating of her own heart. She waited, she counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and on the 13th breath she heard it. The sharp, bright sound of pottery shattering on stone, followed by Sophia's voice raised in what sounded like distress and apology, a plea for help, the convincing performance of a clumsy nun who had dropped her tray and now needed assistance cleaning up the mess. Both soldiers turned toward the sound. One of them stepped through the doorway, drawn by instinct and duty. The other hesitated, looking back toward the courtyard, scanning the shadows, and for one terrible moment his eyes passed over the archway where Esportia was hiding, and she felt his gaze on her skin like the touch of cold steel, and she did not breathe, did not move, did not exist. And then he turned away. He stepped through the doorway after his companion, and the courtyard was empty, and Esportia ran. She ran across the open ground with her heart in her throat and her fear at her heels and her love for her father burning in her chest like a flame that no wind could extinguish. She reached the door. She pushed through it. She found herself in a corridor lit by candles, and at the end of the corridor was another door, smaller, older, reinforced with iron bands, and she knew, with the certainty that only blood can provide, that her father was behind that door. She reached it, she pushed it open, and she saw him. Shahanshah, the emperor, her father, the man who had once ruled an empire that stretched from the Balkans to the borders of Persia, who had commanded armies and navies and the loyalty of millions, who had sat on a throne that had stood for 1,000 years, who had worn the purple and the crown and the weight of history on his shoulders like a mantle made of lead and gold. He lay on a narrow bed in a narrow room, wrapped in a thin blanket, his face the color of old parchment, his eyes sunken, his hair thin and gray, his hands resting on his chest like the hands of a man already laid out for burial. He was not the man she remembered. He was a shadow of that man, a sketch, a fading memory rendered in flesh and bone. The illness had taken everything from him, his strength, his color, his vitality, everything except his eyes, which still burned with the fierce, unyielding intelligence that had kept him alive through decades of political intrigue and palace conspiracy, and the constant, grinding pressure of ruling a dying empire. Those eyes opened when the door opened. They focused on the figure standing in the doorway, and for a moment, just a moment, they did not believe what they were seeing. Esportia, he whispered, and the name was a prayer and a question and a sob all in one. Baba, she said, and she crossed the room in 3 steps and fell to her knees beside his bed and took his hand in both of hers and pressed it against her forehead, and the tears that she had been holding back since she left her husband's house finally broke free and fell on the old man's skin like warm rain on dry earth. "My child," he said, "my child, what have you done? Why are you here? Do you know the danger? Do you know what they will do if they find you?" "I could not leave you here," she said. "I could not sit in comfort while my father rots in a prison. I will not. I will take you away from this place. I will carry you on my back if I must." The old emperor shook his head slowly, and the movement cost him more than it should have, and Esportia saw the wince of pain that crossed his face and felt something inside her break, quietly, irreparably. "You cannot carry me anywhere," he said. "I am too far gone. The sickness has taken root in my bones, in my blood. The physicians, what few they allow me to see, they say it is a matter of weeks, perhaps days, perhaps hours. God alone knows, and God is not sharing his plans with me." "Then I will stay with you," Esportia said. "If you cannot come with me, then I will stay here. I will be with you until the end. I will not let you die alone in this place, among strangers, without a single person who loves you by your side." The emperor looked at his daughter, and his eyes, those fierce, brilliant eyes, softened. "You are married now," he said. "You belong to Orhan. You belong to his house, his people, his world. You cannot stay here. Your husband will come looking for you, and when he finds you here in the heart of Byzantine territory in a monastery guarded by the soldiers of the man who stole my throne, what do you think will happen? War, Esportia. War between your husband and your people. War because of you. Is that what you want? Is that the legacy you wish to leave?" Esportia bowed her head, and the tears kept falling, and the old man's hand remained in hers, and the candle on the table beside the bed flickered in a draught that came from nowhere, and the shadows on the walls moved like living things, like spirits drawn by the sound of grief. And while this scene unfolded in the monastery, while a daughter wept at her father's bedside and an empire crumbled around them both, the ship carrying Sultan Orhan Sahib cut through the dark water toward the coast, and on its deck Orhan Sahib stood with his eyes fixed on the horizon, where the first faint hint of gray was beginning to appear, the promise of dawn, the promise of morning, the promise that the night, no matter how long and dark, would eventually end. But dawn was still hours away, and much would happen before the light came. In the forest, the moon had reached the gap in the trees. Halima looked up, saw the silver disk centered perfectly in the break in the canopy, and knew that the moment had arrived. She did not speak. She did not need to. A gesture, a movement of her hand, small and precise, and the fighters around her began to move. 3 of them peeled away to the north, moving through the trees with the practiced silence of people who had spent their lives in forests, who knew the language of the undergrowth the way scholars know the language of books. They circled the camp, staying well beyond the reach of the firelight, and when they reached the northern perimeter, they stopped and waited for the next signal. Halima raised her hand again, 2 fingers extended, and one of the 3 fighters picked up a stone from the ground, a smooth river stone the size of a fist, and hurled it into the darkness beyond the northern edge of the camp. The stone struck a tree with a sharp crack that echoed through the forest like a snapping bone, and the effect was immediate. The guards at the northern perimeter turned toward the sound. One of them drew his sword. Another called out in a voice tight with sudden tension, "Who is there? Show yourself." No answer came. The forest was silent. The guards advanced, cautiously, their weapons raised, their eyes straining to penetrate the darkness beyond the firelight. And as they advanced, they moved away from the cage, away from Darsoon, away from the very thing they were supposed to be protecting. Halima moved. She came out of the tree line like a wolf out of its den, low and fast and utterly silent. 2 fighters flanked her, their blades drawn, their faces set in the grim masks of people who know that the next few seconds will determine whether they live or die. They reached the cage. Halima drew a knife, a short, curved blade that she kept strapped to her thigh, a blade that Ertugrul Ghazi himself had given her on the day they were married, a blade that had never failed her. She cut the ropes. The first one parted with a sound like a sigh, and then the second, and then the third, and the wooden bars of the cage swung open and Darsoon was free. He staggered out, his legs stiff from hours of confinement, his body aching, his wrists bleeding where the bindings had cut into his skin. But he was free, and freedom gave him strength, and strength gave him speed, and speed was what they needed now. "Come," Halima said quickly, "into the forest, do not look back." And they ran. Halima and Darsoon and the 2 fighters, they ran from the camp into the forest, into the darkness, into the labyrinth of trees and shadows that had been their hiding place and was now their escape route. Behind them, the camp was still focused on the disturbance at the northern perimeter, the guards still calling out into the darkness, still searching for an enemy that was not there, still failing to notice that the prisoner they were supposed to be guarding was no longer in his cage. But that would not last. Halima knew it. She knew that within minutes, perhaps within seconds, someone would turn back toward the cage and find it empty, and then the alarm would be raised, and then the forest would be filled with armed men on horseback, hunting, searching, pursuing. She needed distance. She needed speed. She needed the forest to swallow them completely before the pursuit began. They ran deeper into the trees. The undergrowth tore at their clothes and scratched their skin and tried to trip them with hidden roots and fallen branches, but they pushed through it, driven by the urgency that comes from knowing that every second is the difference between escape and capture, between freedom and death. Behind them, the first shout went up, a voice, loud, angry, panicked. The prisoner is gone. Sound the alarm, find them now." And then the forest erupted. Torches flared to life. Horses were mounted. Orders were screamed into the darkness. The calm, quiet camp that had been drowsing in the warmth of its fires was suddenly a hive of violent activity. Soldiers scrambling for their weapons, commanders bellowing contradictory instructions, the whole machine of military pursuit grinding into motion with the brutal efficiency of men who know that failure means punishment and possibly death. But Halima had planned for this. She had planned for the pursuit, planned for the chaos, planned for the moment when the enemy would realize what had happened and come after them with everything they had. And her plan was simple, because the best plans are always simple. She led them to the river. It was not a large river, not the kind of river that appears on maps and has a name that poets invoke, but it was deep enough and fast enough and cold enough to serve her purpose. It flowed through the forest in a winding course, its banks steep and rocky, its current strong enough to carry a person downstream at a speed that horses could not match on the rough ground of the forest floor. Into the water, Halima commanded, "Follow the current, do not fight it, let it carry you. We will meet at the bend where the old oak grows. You know the place. Go." And they went. One by one, they lowered themselves into the cold, dark water and let the current take them, their bodies disappearing into the river like stones dropped into ink, silent, invisible, gone. Darsoon was the last. He stood on the bank, shivering, his wounds stinging in the cold air, and he looked at Halima with eyes that held something more than gratitude, something deeper, something that transcended the ordinary bonds of alliance and strategy and duty. "You came for me," he said. "Of course I came for you," Halima said. "Now get in the water. We do not have time for speeches." And Darsoon, despite everything, despite the pain and the cold and the fear and the sound of pursuing soldiers crashing through the forest behind them, smiled. A small smile, a brief smile, the kind of smile that appears on the face of a man who has remembered in the worst moment of his life that he is not alone. He entered the water, the current seized him, he was gone. Halima stood on the bank for one more moment, listening to the pursuit, gauging the distance, calculating the time. And then she too stepped into the river, and the cold water closed over her feet and her legs and her waist, and the current pulled her forward, and the forest and the camp and the torches and the shouting soldiers receded behind her, and the only sound was the rush of water and the beating of her own heart and the whispered prayer that moved on her lips like the name of someone she loved. And in the monastery, in the narrow room where an emperor lay dying, Sophia appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her hands were trembling. "Princess," she said, "the soldiers are returning. You must leave. Now, if they find you here, they will kill us both." Esportia did not move. Her hand was still holding her father's hand. Her tears were still falling on his skin. "Go," the emperor said. "Go, my child. Go back to your husband. Go back to your life. Do not throw it away for an old man who has already spent his." "Baba," she began. "Go," he said again, and this time there was iron in his voice, the iron of a man who has given orders to armies and expects them to be obeyed, even now, even here, even lying on a deathbed in a cold stone room in a monastery at the edge of the world. Esportia leaned forward and pressed her lips against her father's forehead, and the kiss was a promise and a farewell and a declaration of war all in one, because Esportia was not the kind of woman who accepted defeat, and this was not the end, and she would return, and when she returned, she would not come alone. She rose, she turned, she walked out of the room without looking back, because if she looked back, she would not be able to leave, and she had to leave, and she knew it, and the knowing was a blade that cut deeper than any sword. Sophia led her back through the hidden passage, back through the narrow corridor behind the tapestry, back through the darkness and the silence and the smell of old stone and older prayers. They moved quickly, urgently, because the soldiers were returning to their posts and the window of escape was closing with every passing second. They reached the outer wall. Sophia pointed to a small door, half hidden behind a vine-covered trellis, a door that led to the outside, to the forest, to the darkness where Esportia's horse might still be wandering. "Go," Sophia said, "go and do not come back, not until you can come back with an army at your back and justice in your hand." Esportia looked at the nun one last time. "Thank you," she said, "I will not forget this, and I will not forget you." And then she was through the door, and the cold night air hit her face, and the forest opened before her like a dark mouth, and she ran into it, ran toward the sound of water, ran toward the smell of horses, ran toward whatever fate was waiting for her in the darkness. She found her horse. It was standing at the edge of the forest, its reins trailing on the ground, its ears pricked forward, its eyes wide with the nervous energy of an animal that has been left alone in a strange place. She mounted quickly, gathered the reins, turned the horse toward the coast, and rode. She rode through the forest as the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the canopy. She rode past sleeping villages and silent farms and the ruins of old Roman fortifications that stood like the bones of a dead civilization, their walls crumbling, their gates broken, their purpose forgot. She rode until the forest thinned and the ground sloped downward and the smell of salt water filled her nostrils, and there on the shore she saw the ship. It was anchored in a small bay, its sails furled, its hull dark against the pale water, and on the shore, standing with his arms crossed and his face unreadable, was Sultan Orhan Sahib. He had arrived before her. He had sailed through the night, had navigated the currents and the winds and the dangers of Byzantine waters, and he was here waiting, watching the forest from which she would emerge, knowing that she would emerge because he knew her better than she knew herself, knew that she would not stay at the monastery, knew that she would come back, knew that the woman he had married was many things, reckless, proud, fierce, stubborn, but she was not a coward and she was not a traitor. And she would return to face whatever judgment